The desert had a way of making men honest. It stripped away pretense, burned off lies, left only what was real. And right now, what was real was blood, Rhett Calder's blood, soaking into the red dirt beside a dying horse. He'd known they were coming for the better part of an hour, felt it in his bones before he heard the first horse's hooves echo off canyon walls. 3 of them, moving with the kind of confidence that came from cornering wounded prey. They'd tracked him across 200 miles of wasteland, following a trail of desperation he'd been too injured to properly hide. The canyon was narrow here, maybe 40 feet across at its widest point, hemmed in by walls of striated sandstone that climbed toward a pale sky. Juniper trees clung to impossible angles in the rock face, their roots like gnarled fingers seeking purchase in stone. It was the kind of place most men would ride through quickly, feeling the weight of all that rock pressing down, sensing the danger of being trapped. Rhett had chosen it deliberately. His horse, a gray mare he'd called Ash, lay on her side, breathing in ragged gasps. The bullet had caught her in the flank 2 hours back, and she'd carried him this far before her legs finally gave out. He'd eased her down as gently as he could, stroking her neck, whispering things that probably didn't matter but felt necessary anyway. "I'm sorry, girl," he'd said. "I'm sorry." Now he sat with his back against a boulder, his left arm pressed tight against his ribs where another bullet had grazed him, tearing through muscle and scraping bone. The wound wasn't fatal, but it was bleeding steadily, and the pain came in waves that made his vision blur at the edges. He could hear them now, voices carrying through the canyon's natural acoustics. "Trail's fresh, can't be more than an hour ahead. Horse is bleeding heavy, won't make it much further. Good. Neither will he." 3 distinct voices, 3 different men. Rhett closed his eyes and pictured them from the signs they'd left over the past 4 days of pursuit. The first would be young, mid-20s maybe, eager and stupid in the way young hunters often were. Too much confidence, not enough scar tissue. The second voice was smoother, more controlled. A professional. Probably 35, maybe 40, the kind who took pride in his work. And the third was older. Much older. The voice carried the rasp of too many cigarettes and too many years spent breathing dust. But there was something else in it. Experience. Wisdom, maybe. Or just the kind of weariness that came from surviving too many situations that should have killed you. That was the dangerous one. Rhett's hand moved to the Colt 45 on his hip, checking the weight of it by instinct. 5 rounds left. He'd used one on the rider who'd gotten too close that morning, another on the man's horse when it tried to trample him. 3 more scattered across various moments of desperation over the past week. 5 rounds. 3 men. The mathematics weren't complicated, but they weren't comforting either. He listened as they drew closer, tracking their progress by sound alone. The jingle of tack, the scrape of iron shoes on stone, the soft creak of leather as someone shifted in their saddle. Then silence. They'd found something. Probably the blood trail where he'd half carried, half dragged himself and Ash into position. Maybe the spot where he'd stopped to reload, leaving behind a scatter of brass casings he'd been too tired to pick up. "He's close!" The young one, voice pitched high with excitement. "Real close! Spread out!" The professional. "Watch the high ground." A pause. Then the old man's voice, quieter than the others, but somehow more certain. "He's already watching us." Rhett almost smiled. Smart bastard. He stayed perfectly still as they entered the canyon proper, 3 riders moving in a loose formation designed to cover angles and minimize exposure. They were good. He'd give them that. The young one took the left flank, rifle already pulled from its scabbard. The professional rode center, one hand resting casually on his thigh, just inches from his pistol. And the old man came up the right side, moving slowly, eyes constantly scanning. They spotted Ash first. The young hunter pulled up short, raising one hand in a fist to signal the others. "Got a horse down, 40 yards ahead." "Rider?" The professional's voice remained steady. "Can't see from here." "Then get closer, carefully." They advanced in stages, leapfrogging positions with the kind of discipline that spoke to military training or years of expensive mistakes. Rhett tracked them through the gaps in the rocks he'd positioned himself behind, watching as they narrowed the distance. 20 yards, 15, 10. "There, sir," the old man pointed with 2 fingers. Behind those boulders. See the boot heel? Rhett stopped trying to hide. No point now. He shifted slightly, letting them get a clear look at him. A man sitting in dirt and blood, one arm held tight against his side, his face pale beneath several days of trail dust and stubble. He looked like exactly what they expected. Prey run to ground. The young one grinned. Got you now, Calder. Maybe. Rhett's voice came out rougher than he'd intended, sandpaper on stone. Or maybe you got yourself into something you don't understand yet. The professional dismounted smoothly, keeping his horse between himself and Rhett. Big talk from a man who's bleeding out. Bleeding, sure. Out? Rhett tilted his head slightly. That's still up for debate. The old man stayed mounted, but his eyes never stopped moving, taking in the canyon walls, the scatter of rocks, the narrow approaches, reading the ground the way some men read books. This is good terrain, the old man said quietly, for someone who knows how to use it. Silas, come on. The young hunter gestured impatiently with his rifle. He's cornered, probably can't even stand up straight. The old man, Silas, ignored him, still studying the landscape. How many rounds you got left, Calder? Enough. For all three of us? Maybe not. Rhett met his eyes steadily. But definitely enough for two. You want to find out which two? The professional stepped around his horse, hand now openly on his pistol grip. The bounty's the same whether you're breathing or not. Your choice which way this goes. Funny thing about choices, Rhett said. I've been making them all week. Each one a little harder than the last. Started with choosing to help someone who needed it. Then choosing to run instead of fight when the odds were 10-1. Choosing which roads to take, which water to drink, when to rest, and when to push through. He paused, letting his gaze drift across all three of them. But you three? You only made one choice. You chose to follow money into a canyon where there's no room to maneuver and nowhere to take cover except behind horses that'll spook at the first gunshot. You chose ground that echoes, so I've been listening to every word you said for the past 20 minutes. And you chose to assume that a wounded man is the same thing as a helpless man. The young hunter's grin had faded. You're bluffing. Am I? Rhett's hand moved slightly, not toward his gun, but away from his ribs. For the first time, they could see the Winchester rifle lying across his lap, half hidden beneath his duster coat. Already cocked, already aimed. The professional froze mid-step. Silas let out a long, slow breath. Well, hell. Three of you. Rhett continued, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. One of me. But I've got high ground, I've got cover, and I've got a rifle that'll punch through a man at this range like he's made of paper. You've got horses that are about to panic, open ground with no protection, and maybe 3 seconds to decide if that bounty's worth dying for. Nobody moved. Ash made a small sound, half groan, half sigh, and her breathing changed rhythm. Rhett felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't look at her. Couldn't afford to. Here's how I see it, he said. The kid goes first because he's already thinking about being a hero. The professional goes second because he'll try to draw and fire while the kid's falling, betting that I can't work the lever fast enough. And Silas, Rhett's eyes found the old man again. Silas might actually make it out because Silas is smart enough to ride away the second the shooting starts. The young hunter's jaw clenched. You son of a... Don't! Silas's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare! But he's right. The old man's gaze never left Rhett's face. About all of it. The professional's hand twitched near his pistol. We've tracked him for 4 days. I'm not walking away empty-handed. Then die full-handed, Rhett said flatly. Makes no difference to me. For 5 heartbeats, nobody moved. The canyon held its breath, waiting. Then Silas did something unexpected. He raised both hands slowly, deliberately, and dismounted. Not in surrender exactly, more like acknowledgement. He walked his horse 3 steps backward, creating distance, creating space. I'm out, he said simply. The young hunter spun in his saddle. What, Silas, you can't just... Watch me. The old man's voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. I've been hunting men for 23 years, boy, and I've learned to recognize 3 things. First, when the odds aren't what they seem. Second, when someone's already won the fight before it starts. And third, he glanced at Rhett again, something almost like respect flickering across his weathered features. When the man you're hunting is willing to die to make his point, but you're only willing to kill for money, The professional's face had gone hard. That bounty's $5,000. Spend it however you want, Silas said. I'll be spending mine on breathing. He mounted again, turned his horse, and rode slowly back the way they'd come. Not running, not hurrying, just leaving, with the kind of dignity that made it clear he'd made his peace with the decision. Which left too. The young hunter's hands had started shaking, just slightly, but enough. He was maybe 24, 25 years old. Probably came west looking for adventure, found bounty hunting by accident, and spent the last few months convincing himself he was good at it. Now he was learning the difference between good and good enough. I'll make you a deal, Rhett said, directing his words at the young one. Right away. Right now. And I won't remember your face. I can't. Sure you can. Just turn your horse around and go. Tomorrow you'll wake up alive, which is more than you can say if you stay. The professional laughed, a short, bitter sound. You're not talking him out of this. I'm not talking to you. Well, you should be. The professional's hand moved in a blur, going for his pistol with the kind of speed that came from hundreds of hours of practice. He was fast. Rhett was faster. The Winchester barked once, the sound enormous in the confined space of the canyon. The professional jerked backward, a red stain blossoming across his chest, and fell in a heap that would have been almost comical if it wasn't so final. The young hunter's rifle swung toward Rhett, but his hands were shaking too hard, his movements too panicked. He fired wild, the bullet spanging off rock 10 feet to Rhett's left. Rhett worked the lever, chambered another round, and fired. The kid went down, then silence. Just the ringing in Rhett's ears and the echo of gunshots bouncing off canyon walls, repeating and fading and finally dying away to nothing. Ash's breathing had stopped. Rhett let the rifle drop to his lap and pressed his hand back against his ribs. The wound was bleeding worse now, aggravated by the movement, by the adrenaline crash already starting to hit. His vision swam for a moment, and he had to close his eyes and breathe through his nose until the dizziness passed. When he opened them again, Silas had returned. The old man sat his horse at the canyon's entrance, maybe 60 yards distant, hands visible and empty. They looked at each other for a long moment. You killed them, Silas said. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. They made their choice. That they did. Silas swung down from his saddle again, ground tying his horse with the ease of long practice. Then, slowly and deliberately, he unbuckled his gun belt and draped it over his saddle horn. Rhett watched him approach, unarmed, until they were close enough to talk without shouting. Why? Rhett asked. Why what? Why come back? Silas looked down at the two bodies, then at Ash, then finally at Rhett. Because I've been doing this long enough to know when something doesn't add up. $5,000 is a lot of money, sure, but you're not the kind of man who earns that kind of bounty without a reason. Maybe I'm just worth it. Maybe. Silas pulled a canteen from his belt and tossed it carefully, underhand. It landed in the dirt near Rhett's boot. Or maybe someone wants you dead bad enough to make sure every gun for hire west of the Mississippi comes looking. Rhett picked up the canteen with his free hand, uncapped it, and drank. The water was warm and tasted like leather, but it was wet. You asking why there's a price on my head? I'm asking why a man who fights like you just fought doesn't head for Mexico or Canada or anywhere except the exact place that Bounty says you're heading. Where's that? Harrisville. Little railroad town about 90 miles northwest of here. Silas tilted his head. According to the wanted poster, you're bringing something there. Something someone really doesn't want delivered. Rhett said nothing. Now, I'm a simple man, Silas continued, but I know this territory. And I know that the only thing in Harrisville worth dying over is the land office, which means this isn't about murder or robbery or any of the usual reasons men get hunted. He paused. This is about property. Smart man. Smart enough to know when I'm on the wrong side. Silas gestured at the canyon around them. So here's my offer. I've got medical supplies on my horse, I've got food and water and a spare mount, and I've got 23 years of knowing how to move through this country without being seen. In exchange for what? The truth. And maybe... Silas's expression shifted, something almost like shame crossing his face. Maybe a chance to do something that matters before I get too old to matter at all. Rhett studied him for a long moment. 40 years of life had taught him to read men, and what he saw in Silas Vane wasn't deception. It was exhaustion. The kind that came from doing the same thing over and over, and finally waking up one morning wondering what the hell it had all been for. "There's a woman," Rhett said finally. "Elena Vargas owns a ranch about 100 miles south of here, or used to anyway. 3 years ago, a man named Marcus Hale started buying up land around her property. Legal at first, then not so legal. Forged deeds, intimidated neighbors into selling for nothing, killed a few who refused. And she has proof, 6 years worth. Ledgers, original deeds, witness statements, everything you'd need to put Hale away for the rest of his life and return stolen land to its rightful owners." Rhett's jaw tightened. "If you can get it to someone who gives a damn," which is why Harrisville. Territory marshals based there, man named Coleman, supposed to be honest, which in this part of the world is either a miracle or a lie. But Elena thinks he'll listen. And Hale thinks otherwise. Hale knows if that evidence reaches Coleman, his whole operation collapses. So he put up $5,000 for me, probably another $5 for Elena, and sent every hired gun he could find to make sure we never make it. Rhett gestured at his wound. "We got separated 2 days back when a group of Hale's men caught up with us. I drew them off so she could keep moving. Haven't seen her since." Silas was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Is she alive?" "If she wasn't, the bounty would have been pulled. Hale's smart enough to know that dead witnesses can't testify, but evidence can. He needs to find her and that paperwork before it reaches Harrisville. So right now she's out there somewhere, alone, probably being hunted by 6 men who'll kill her the second they find her. That about sums it up. And you're sitting here bleeding into the dirt instead of helping her." "I'm sitting here," Rhett said evenly, "because 20 miles back I realized I was leaving a blood trail a blind man could follow. If I kept going, I'd have led them straight to her. So I turned east, made my trail obvious, and let them think they were closing in on their prize." He met Silas's eyes. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is become the target everyone else is aiming at. Understanding dawned on Silas's face. "You're the decoy." "Was. Until my horse gave out, and I had to make a stand here instead of 10 miles further on like I'd planned." Rhett's voice went flat. "Now I'm just a man who's running out of time." Silas looked at the bodies again, then back at Rhett. "How many more are coming? How many you think Hale can afford? At 5,000 a head, probably 20, maybe 30 guns. Though most of them will be tracking the woman, not you." "Then she's in more danger than I thought." Rhett tried to stand, made it halfway up before his vision grayed out, and his legs went soft. He would have fallen if Silas hadn't caught him. "Easy. You've lost too much blood to be playing hero right now." "Don't have time for easy." "You don't have time to die either." Silas eased him back down against the boulder. "Let me work on that wound. Then we talk about what comes next." "There is no we. You said it yourself. You're out." "I'm out of hunting you," Silas corrected. "Didn't say anything about helping you." He was already moving toward his horse, pulling supplies from his saddlebags. "Besides, I've spent 23 years tracking men for money. Figured it might be interesting to try tracking someone to save them for a change." Rhett wanted to argue, but the truth was he needed help. The wound was bad, getting worse, and even if he somehow made it to Harrisville alive, he'd be useless when he got there. Silas returned with bandages, a bottle of whiskey, and a needle already threaded with catgut. "This is going to hurt. Everything hurts." "Fair enough." Silas uncapped the whiskey, took a long pull, then handed it over. "Drink." Rhett drank. Then Silas went to work, and Rhett learned that there were degrees of pain he hadn't previously experienced. The old man was efficient but not gentle, cleaning the wound with whiskey that burned like liquid fire, then stitching torn muscle back together with quick, practiced movements. "You've done this before," Rhett managed through gritted teeth. "More times than I can count. Had it done to me almost as many." Silas didn't look up from his work. "You get shot enough times, you either learn basic surgery or you die. I chose learning." "Wise choice?" "Debatable." He finished the last stitch, tied it off, and started wrapping bandages. "This'll hold for a few days if you don't do anything stupid, which means no fighting, no heavy lifting, and definitely no more dramatic shootouts in canyons. I'll try to remember that next time someone's trying to kill me." Silas almost smiled. Almost. Tell me about Elena Vargas. What about her? What kind of woman fights Marcus Hale? Because from what I know of Hale, he doesn't leave enemies alive long enough to become problems. Rhett was quiet for a moment, remembering. The kind who loses everything and decides that's exactly what makes her dangerous. Her husband was killed 2 years back. Riding accident, according to the official report. Trampled by his own horse in a dry creek bed. But not really. But not really. Rhett's voice went hard. Miguel Vargas knew horses better than most men know their own names. That horse didn't spook. It was spooked. Probably by the 3 men who shot at it from cover, then made sure Miguel's neck was broken before they left. Hale's men. Hale's men. Elena knew it, couldn't prove it. So she started digging, started asking questions, started finding other people who'd lost land or family or both. Started collecting evidence piece by piece until she had enough to bring down an empire. Rhett looked toward the horizon, toward where he hoped Elena was still riding. She asked me for help 3 weeks ago. Said she needed someone who could fight to get her safely to Harrisville. Why you? Because I owed Miguel. He pulled me out of a bad situation about 5 years back, didn't ask questions, didn't ask for payment, just helped, because that's who he was. Rhett's jaw clenched. Seemed like the least I could do was make sure his widow got justice. Silas tied off the bandage and sat back on his heels. You're in love with her. I'm helping her. That's not what I asked. Rhett didn't answer, which was answer enough. Well, Silas said after a moment, that complicates things. No, it doesn't. My feelings aren't relevant. Getting her to Harrisville is the only thing that matters. Your feelings are extremely relevant if they're clouding your judgment. They're not. Really. Because sitting here waiting to die so she can escape sounds an awful lot like the kind of stupid decision a man makes when he's thinking with his heart instead of his head. Rhett's hand moved toward his gun, stopped halfway. You got a point, or are you just trying to annoy me? My point, Silas said patiently, is that dying for her doesn't help her. What helps her is you staying alive long enough to actually do something useful. So let's figure out what that something is. He spread out a map on the ground between them, weighted corners with rocks. It was old, hand-drawn, the kind of thing only locals carried. Trails and water sources marked in faded ink. If she's smart, and I'm betting she is, she went north toward the old mining roads. Longer route, but less traveled. Harder to ambush. Silas traced a path with one finger. Problem is, there's only 3 ways through the mountains from there, and Hale's men will know all of them. So she's trapped. Or she needs a distraction big enough that they're looking the wrong direction when she makes her move. Rhett saw where this was going. You want me to ride into Harrisville and make noise. I want you to survive long enough to reach Harrisville, yes. Then make so much noise that every gun Hale has comes running. Silas looked up from the map. Think you can do that? In my current condition, maybe. If I don't bleed out first. You won't bleed out. I've seen men lose twice as much blood and keep fighting. Silas started packing up his medical supplies. Besides, you've got help now. You're really doing this. Seems I am. Why? Silas was quiet for a long time, staring at something far beyond the canyon walls. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, older somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Because 30 years ago, I was a different man, believed in things, fought for things that mattered. Then I got tired, got cynical, got good at tracking people for money, started telling myself it was just business, just survival. Started forgetting that every man I brought in had a story, had reasons, had people who cared whether they lived or died. He looked directly at Rhett. I'm 62 years old. I've got maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky, 5 if I'm not. And I'd rather spend those years knowing I helped one person who deserved it than spend them collecting bounties on people I never bothered to understand. He stood, offered his hand. So, yeah, I'm really doing this. Rhett took the hand, let Silas pull him to his feet. The world spun for a second, then settled. You know this probably ends badly. Most things do. And that we're outgunned, outmanned, and out of time. Wouldn't be interesting otherwise. Despite everything, the pain, the blood, the 2 dead men lying nearby, Rhett found himself almost smiling. You're crazier than I thought. That's what my wife used to say. God rest her. Silas moved toward his horse. Come on. We burn an hour here. We waste it. And something tells me Elena Vargas doesn't have an hour to waste. They buried the two bounty hunters quickly. Shallow graves marked with stones. It was more than they deserved, but less than they'd wanted. Silas claimed the professional's horse, a good roan gelding that hadn't been injured in the fight, and loaded supplies while Rhett said goodbye to Ash. He knelt beside her, ran his hand along her neck one last time. She'd carried him across half the territory, never complained, never hesitated. Now she was still, eyes closed, finally at peace. "You were a good horse," he said quietly. "Better than I deserved. I'm sorry I couldn't get you out of this." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. When he stood, Silas was watching him with an expression that might have been sympathy. "Ready?" the old man asked. Rhett looked back at Ash one more time, then at the canyon that had almost been his grave, then finally toward the northwest where Harrisville waited. "No," he said honestly, "but let's go anyway." They rode out as the sun began its descent toward evening. Two men who'd been enemies an hour ago, now bound together by something neither could fully name. Behind them, the canyon slowly filled with shadow, swallowing evidence of the brief, violent moment that had changed everything. Ahead, somewhere in the vast emptiness of the territory, Elena Vargas rode alone with 6 years of evidence and maybe a day's head start on the men hunting her. The mathematics still weren't good, but they were better than they'd been. And sometimes, Rhett thought as the horse settled into a steady lope, better was enough to build hope on. Even if that hope was fragile, wounded, and running on borrowed time. They made 15 miles before Rhett's body started shutting down on him. Not all at once, more like a series of small surrenders. First his left hand went numb, fingers losing their grip on the reins. Then the world started tilting at odd angles, horizon line refusing to stay level. By the time Silas called a halt near a dried creek bed lined with cottonwoods, Rhett was holding on to consciousness the way a drowning man holds on to driftwood. "Off the horse," Silas said, already dismounting. "Now, before you fall off." Rhett tried to argue, managed something that might have been words, then found himself on the ground with no clear memory of how he'd gotten there. The impact jarred his ribs, sent pain screaming through his torso, and for a few seconds the world went white and empty. When it came back, Silas was checking his bandages. "Still holding," the old man muttered. "But you're burning up, wounds infected or trying to be." "I'm fine." "You're a liar." Silas pressed the back of his hand against Rhett's forehead, frowned. "Fever's starting. We push you any harder tonight, you'll be delirious by morning." "Don't have time for this." "Don't have time to die either, but you keep working toward it." Silas stood, started gathering deadwood for a fire. "We rest here till dawn. Get some food in you, some real sleep. Then we ride hard. Elena's got maybe a day and a half head start if she's smart and lucky. We're still 3 days out from Harrisville, even if we kill the horses getting there." Silas dropped an armload of branches, began arranging them. 6 hours of sleep now buys us better speed tomorrow. Do the math. Rhett wanted to keep arguing, but the truth was he could barely keep his eyes open. The fever was real, he could feel it now. Heat radiating from his core, chills running down his spine despite the evening warmth. His body had been running on adrenaline and spite for too long, and the bill was coming due. "Fine," he said. 6 hours. 8. 6. Silas struck a match, held it to a nest of dry grass until flames caught. "We'll see how you feel when you wake up." They didn't talk much as Silas prepared a meal. Salt pork and beans from his saddlebags, coffee so strong it could strip paint. Rhett forced himself to eat even though his stomach rebelled at the idea, knowing he needed the strength. The coffee helped, cutting through the fog in his head just enough to think clearly for a few minutes. "Tell me about Hale," Silas said, sitting across the fire. "What kind of man are we dealing with?" "The worst kind. Smart, patient, absolutely certain he's entitled to whatever he wants." Rhett took another sip of coffee, felt it burn all the way down. "Came west about 7 years back with railroad money. Started buying land along the proposed routes, nothing illegal about that. But when the railroad changed course, he didn't cut his losses and move on. He just changed tactics. Forgery. Among other things, turns out it's easy to claim land when the original owner's dead and the deed's locked in a safe you control. Even easier when the local land office is in your pocket. Let me guess. He owns the clerk. Clerk, sheriff, half the town council. Anyone who matters, anyone who could stop him. Rhett stared into the fire, watching sparks spiral upward into darkness. Miguel started noticing the pattern about 3 years ago. Neighbors selling cheap, families leaving in the middle of the night, accidents that weren't accidents. He tried going to the territorial marshal, but without proof, it was just one man's word against a wealthy landowner's reputation. So he started gathering proof. Him and Elena both. Spent 2 years documenting everything, matching forged deeds to originals, tracking money, recording testimonies from people brave enough or desperate enough to talk. Rhett's voice went quiet. Then Miguel had his accident, and Elena was alone. Silas poked at the fire with a stick, sending up fresh sparks. Why didn't she run? Take what she had and get out while she could? Because Miguel told her something before he died. Something about the land being worth more than money, about it being the only thing that can't be taken without a fight. Rhett looked up, met Silas's eyes. He asked her to finish what he started, to make sure every family that lost something to Hale's greed got it back. That's a heavy promise to carry. She carries it anyway. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them, night settling over the desert like a blanket. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, was answered by another, then another, a whole conversation in a language humans could only guess at. What happens if we get the evidence to Harrisville? Silas asked eventually. What happens to Hale? If Marshal Coleman's as honest as people say, Hale loses everything. Land gets returned to rightful owners. He faces charges for fraud, murder, conspiracy, probably hangs. And if Coleman's not honest? Rhett's expression hardened. Then Elena and I die for nothing, and Hale keeps building his empire on stolen ground. You really think Coleman can be trusted? I think Elena thinks he can be trusted, and that's enough for me. Silas studied him across the firelight. You love her. It wasn't a question this time. Rhett didn't answer immediately. He finished his coffee, set the cup down, stared at his hands. They were scarred, calloused, marked by years of hard living. Not the kind of hands that got to hold on to anything good for very long. Doesn't matter what I feel, he said finally. She loved Miguel, still loves him. I'm just the man helping her keep a promise to her dead husband. Maybe that's all she needs right now. Maybe that's all I can give. Silas was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Rhett wanted to protest, wanted to insist he could handle his share, but his body had other ideas. The moment he lay down, stretched out on his bedroll with his saddle for a pillow, exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. He felt himself sliding toward unconsciousness, tried to fight it, failed. His last thought before darkness took him was of Elena, somewhere out there in the vast night, still riding. He dreamed of the canyon again, but this time when the shooting started, his gun wouldn't fire. He pulled the trigger over and over, heard only hollow clicks while the bounty hunters closed in, grinning. Then the hunters had Elena's face, all three of them, and she was asking him why he'd let her down, why he'd promised to protect her if he was just going to fail when it mattered. He woke with a gasp, hand reaching for the Colt that wasn't there. Silas had moved it while he slept, probably to keep him from shooting at shadows in his fever dreams. Easy, Silas said from across the dead fire. Just dreams. Rhett sat up, regretted it immediately. His head pounded, his ribs screamed, and his mouth tasted like something had died in it. But the fever had broken. He could feel that much. The unnatural heat had faded, replaced by the normal ache of a healing wound. What time is it? About 2 hours before dawn. Silas was already moving, kicking dirt over the fire's remains. How you feeling? Like I got shot and then rode 15 miles. But can you ride 15 more? Rhett tested his left arm, found he could move it without his vision graying out. Yeah, I can ride. Good, because we need to talk about what happens when we reach Harrisville. They saddled the horses in the pre-dawn darkness, working by feel and the faint light of stars. Silas had already packed everything, left nothing but boot prints and cold ashes to mark their passage. Hale's got men in town, Silas said as they mounted. Probably 6, maybe 8. They'll be watching the roads, waiting for either you or Elena to show up. So we don't take the roads. There's back trails, yeah. But here's the thing. Even if we get you into town unseen, even if you find Marshal Coleman and convince him to listen, you're still missing the actual evidence, which is with Elena, who might be dead, captured, or 100 miles from where we think she is. Rhett had been thinking about that all night between fever dreams. So we need to find her first. Or we need to draw Hale's attention so completely that she can walk into town without anyone noticing. How do we do that? Silas smiled, and there was something almost wolfish in it. We give Hale exactly what he wants. We give him you. They rode through what remained of the night, pushing the horses harder than was wise, but not as hard as desperation wanted. The land changed as they moved northwest. Desert giving way to scrub to grassland. Grass to the first hints of pine forest climbing toward distant mountains. Silas knew the country, knew it the way some men knew their own homes. He led them through draws and coulees, across creek beds and over ridge lines, always moving, always choosing paths that kept them invisible from the main trails. "You've run this route before," Rhett observed. "More times than I can count. Used to scout for the cavalry back when there was still cavalry worth scouting for." Silas gestured ahead where the land rose toward a pine-covered slope. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles up. Abandoned now, but it's got walls and a roof. Good place to hole up, rest the horses, make plans. We don't have time for plans. We don't have time for mistakes either." They reached the line shack just after sunrise, a weathered structure built into the side of a hill, half buried by years of pine needles and probably forgotten by whoever had built it. But the roof held, the door still swung on leather hinges, and there was a stone fireplace that had seen recent use. "Someone's been here," Rhett said, dismounting carefully. "Probably hunters, or someone running from the law." Silas led his horse inside, into the single room that smelled of old smoke and rodent nests. "Either way, they're gone now." They settled the horses, rationed out grain and water, then Silas spread out his map on the rough wooden table that was the shack's only furniture. "Harrisville," he said, tapping a spot where several trails converged near a river. "Population maybe 300, growing fast because of the railroad. Main Street runs east-west, land office on the north end, marshal's office across from the saloon. Where would Hale's men be? If I were positioning them?" Silas traced circles on the map. 2 at the land office watching for Elena. 2 at the marshal's office in case you're stupid enough to walk right in. 1 or 2 roaming, checking hotels and saloons. And at least 1 rider on the eastern approach, which is the logical route from where you and Elena were last seen. "So we come from the west, or we don't go to town at all. Not yet." Silas looked up from the map. "Here's what I'm thinking. You're the prize everyone's chasing, so we use that. We let word slip that you're holed up somewhere nearby, somewhere visible, somewhere defendable, somewhere that'll take all of Hale's men to dig you out. While Elena slips into town unnoticed." Exactly. Rhett considered it. The plan had merit. Drawing fire was something he was already good at, but there were problems. How do we let word slip without actually getting caught? Leave a trail. Let someone see you. Make it look like you're trying to hide, but not quite succeeding. Silas folded the map. "There's a box canyon about 12 miles west of Harrisville. High walls, narrow entrance, perfect defensive position. If Hale's men think you're cornered there, they'll come with everything they have. And I'll be actually cornered. For a while, yeah. But by the time they realize it's a trap, Elena will have already made her move. Assuming she's still alive. Assuming she makes it to Harrisville. Assuming Coleman listens to her." Rhett shook his head. "That's a lot of assumptions. You got a better plan?" He didn't, which was the problem. They spent the next hour working through details, running scenarios, identifying everything that could go wrong. The list was long, but slowly, reluctantly, a shape emerged. Not quite a plan, more like a framework for controlled chaos. "We need to know if Elena's close," Rhett said. "If she's still moving, still safe. Way I figure it, she had 2 routes she could take from where you split up." Silas traced paths on the map. Northern route through the mining roads. Longer, harder, but safer. Or southern route along the river. Faster, more exposed. "Which would you take?" "If I were her?" "Northern. But if I thought I was running out of time, if I thought you might be dead and I was the only one left?" Silas met his eyes. "I'd risk the river, cut days off the journey, get to Harrisville before Hale realizes what's happening." "So we check the river trail." "We check the river trail," Silas agreed. "And if we find signs she passed through, we know she's ahead of us. If we don't..." He left that thought unfinished. They rode out an hour later, heading northwest toward the river trail Silas had described. The country here was different, more water, more vegetation, terrain that provided both cover and danger in equal measure, places where an ambush could come from any direction. Rhett felt his nerves tightening with every mile, his hand never far from his pistol. The fever was gone, but the wound still pulled with each movement, reminding him he wasn't operating at full strength. One more fight might be one too many. "There," Silas said suddenly, pointing ahead where the trail crossed a shallow ford. "See the tracks?" Rhett looked. At first he saw nothing but the usual confusion of prints, deer, maybe a few wild horses. Then his eye caught the pattern. A single horse, shod, moving at steady pace. The prints were maybe a day old, blurred slightly by wind, but still clear enough to read. "Could be anyone," he said. "Could be, but look at the gait." Silas dismounted, knelt beside one of the clearest prints. Horse is favoring its right front leg, just slightly, but enough. And see how deep these prints are? Riders carrying extra weight, probably saddlebags loaded with something heavy. Like 6 years' worth of documents and evidence. Rhett felt something loosen in his chest. Not quite hope, but close enough. She made it this far. At least a day ago, maybe more. Silas remounted. If she kept this pace, she's already close to Harrisville. Might even be there. Then we're out of time. We've been out of time since this started. Silas kicked his horse into a trot. Question is whether we can move fast enough to matter. They followed the trail for another hour, watching it lead steadily northwest, occasionally crossing other paths but always continuing in the same direction. Whoever had left these tracks knew where they were going and weren't wasting time getting there. Then the tracks stopped. Not gradually, abruptly. One moment clear prints in soft ground beside the river, the next moment nothing but unmarked earth and stone. Rhett pulled up, scanning the area. She turned off, or got taken. Silas was already quartering the ground, searching for signs. Look for disturbance, broken branches, anything that doesn't fit. They found it 30 yards downstream, a place where someone had deliberately brushed out tracks using pine branches, then tossed the branches into the river. It was careful work, thorough, but not quite perfect. A few scuff marks remained, just enough to show where horse and rider had left the trail and headed into the trees. "Smart," Silas said with grudging admiration. "Real smart. She's covering her approach, making sure no one can track her the last few miles, or someone caught up with her and forced her off the trail. If someone caught her, we'd see signs of struggle. This is deliberate." Silas pointed at the brushed ground. "She's close now, close enough to be extra careful." They spent 10 minutes searching the tree line before finding the continuation of the trail, faint marks in pine needles, a broken branch at horse height, a single hoof print in a patch of mud. Elena had gone to ground, moving slowly and carefully through forest that would hide her from anyone watching the main approaches to town. "We can't follow her without leaving our own trail," Rhett said. "And if Hale's men are watching for this kind of thing, they'll know someone else is coming." Silas nodded. "Which means we stick to the original plan. We make noise, draw attention, give her the opening she needs." They turned west, leaving the river trail behind, heading toward the box canyon Silas had mentioned. The land rose steadily, pine forest thinning into rocky slopes and natural stone formations that looked like giants had been playing with building blocks, and then wandered off. "Tell me about this canyon," Rhett said. "Used to be a hideout for rustlers back in the 70s. They'd drive stolen cattle in, rebrand them, wait for the heat to die down. Then someone got smart, blocked the entrance while the rustlers were inside, starved them out. After that, people started calling it Dead End Canyon." "Charming name. Earned it honestly." Silas gestured ahead where the terrain was starting to funnel into a natural corridor. Openings about 20 feet wide, walls rise maybe 60 feet on either side. Canyon itself goes back about 100 yards, dead ends against a sheer rock face. There's a few natural ledges up high where someone could position themselves, control the entrance. And if Hale's men rush the entrance, then you make them pay for every foot. They'll have to come at you narrow, probably single file. Even 6 or 7 men will struggle to bring their numbers to bear in that space. "How long can I hold it?" "Depends on how much ammunition you've got and whether they're brave or stupid." Silas glanced at him. "But realistically, maybe an hour, 2 if you're lucky and they're cautious. After that, they'll find another way in or just wait you out." "An hour might be enough." "Might be. If Elena's where we think she is, if she moves when we need her to, if Coleman's not in Hale's pocket after all." Silas shook his head. That's a lot of ifs. Story of this whole damn thing. They reached the canyon entrance just past noon, a narrow gap in the rock face that looked like the earth had been split by an axe. Silas had been right about the dimensions, 20 feet wide, maybe less, with walls that rose straight up on both sides. Looking down that corridor was like looking down a stone throat. Welcoming place, Rhett said dryly. Has its charm. Silas dismounted, began examining the ground. No recent tracks. No one's been here in weeks, maybe months. They led the horses inside, and the temperature dropped immediately, sunlight cut off by the high walls. The canyon floor was dirt and stone, scattered with rocks that had fallen from above over the years. At the far end, just as Silas had described, a solid wall of stone rose up like a curtain. There, Silas pointed at a series of natural ledges about 20 feet up the right wall. That's your position. Good sight lines on the entrance, partial cover from above, and enough height that they can't rush you easy. Rhett studied the approach, the angles, the distances. It could work. Not well, not safely, but it could work. How do we let Hale know I'm here? We make sure someone sees you ride in. Then we make sure that someone gets away to tell the tale. Silas was already unpacking supplies from his saddlebags. I'll handle that part. You just worry about being ready when they come. You're going back to town. Someone has to, and you're in no condition to play scout. Silas handed over ammunition, 2 boxes of rifle rounds, a box of pistol cartridges. I'll spread word that Rhett Calder was spotted heading toward Dead End Canyon, wounded, desperate, probably dying. Give it a few hours, and every gun Hale has will be riding this way. What about Elena? If she's in town, I'll find her. Let her know you're buying her time. Silas checked his weapons, then looked Rhett square in the eyes. You sure about this? Once they come, there's no backing out. I've been sure since the moment I told Elena I'd help. Rhett managed something that might have been a smile. Besides, you said it yourself. I'm already dying. Might as well make it count for something. You're not dying. Not yet. Rhett gripped Silas's shoulder briefly. But if this goes wrong, if I don't make it out, make sure Elena knows. Make sure she knows it mattered. Silas held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and final. She'll know. Then he was mounting, riding back toward the canyon entrance, hoofbeats echoing off stone walls until distance swallowed them completely. Rhett stood alone in the canyon, listening to silence settle back in like dust. He looked up at the walls rising around him, at the narrow strip of sky visible between them, at the ledge where he'd make his stand. Dead End Canyon. The name really was appropriate. He spent the next hour preparing, positioning rocks for cover, checking sight lines, placing ammunition where he could reach it quickly. The work was methodical, calming in its own way. Each small decision, each small action, building toward a moment that would either save Elena or kill them both. When he finally climbed to the ledge, positioning himself with the Winchester across his lap and the Colt within easy reach, he found himself thinking about Miguel Vargas, about a man he'd known only briefly but respected deeply, about the promise Miguel had extracted from Elena before he died. Make it right. Simple words, impossible task. But here, now, in this narrow canyon with death probably coming before sunset, Rhett finally understood what Miguel had really been asking. Not for revenge, not even for justice exactly. Just for someone to stand up and say, no more. No more stolen land. No more forged documents. No more families driven from their homes while men like Hale got richer on suffering. No more. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening across the canyon floor. Rhett waited, breathing slowly, keeping his mind clear. The wound in his ribs had settled into a dull throb, not comfortable but manageable. The fever was gone. His hands were steady. He was as ready as he was going to get. Somewhere in Harrisville, Elena was making her own preparations, gathering her courage, checking her evidence, preparing to walk into the marshal's office and bet everything on one man's integrity. And somewhere between here and there, Silas Vane was spreading the word that would bring Hale's army down on this canyon like a hammer. The pieces were moving. The trap was set. Now all Rhett had to do was survive what came next. He heard them coming 20 minutes before sunset, the sound of multiple horses moving fast, carrying men who thought they had their quarry cornered. Rhett counted the hoofbeats, parsing out individual animals from the thunder of their approach. 6 riders. Maybe 7. The mathematics were getting worse. He eased back from the ledge's edge, making himself less visible, and settled the Winchester against his shoulder. Watched the canyon entrance. Waited. They appeared as silhouettes against the fading light, 6 men on horseback, spreading out as they entered the canyon, rifles already drawn. Not stupid, then. They'd been briefed, knew what they were riding into. One of them, a tall man in a black duster, called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Calder, we know you're in here. Make this easy on yourself. Come out now, we'll make it quick." Rhett said nothing, watching them fan out, searching the shadows. "Got nowhere to go," another voice added. "Canyon's got one way in, one way out, and we're standing in it." Still Rhett waited, letting them move deeper, letting them commit. The tall man in the duster dismounted, gestured for 2 others to do the same. They started forward on foot, rifles raised, checking behind rocks and overhangs. Professional, coordinated, dangerous. Rhett picked his target carefully. Not the leader, not yet. The nervous one on the left flank, the one whose rifle barrel kept drifting, whose eyes darted everywhere at once. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester's bark was enormous in the confined space, and the nervous man went down in a heap. Before the echo had finished bouncing off the walls, Rhett had chambered another round and fired again, catching one of the mounted riders in the shoulder, spinning him out of his saddle. Then chaos. The horses panicked, plunging and screaming. The remaining men scattered, diving for cover, returning fire wildly. Bullets sang off rock around Rhett's position, but the angle was wrong. They couldn't hit him without exposing themselves, and he'd chosen his ground too well. "Up high!" someone shouted. "He's on the ledge!" More gunfire, more deliberate this time, forcing Rhett to duck back. He counted shots, tracked positions, waited for the lull that would come when they had to reload. It came 15 seconds later. Rhett leaned out, fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 misses, 1 hit. Another man down, clutching his leg and screaming. 3 down. 3 or 4 still in the fight. "Fall back!" The man in the duster, taking command. "Get out of the kill zone!" They retreated in good order, dragging their wounded, leaving 2 horses dead and 1 dying. Rhett let them go, conserving ammunition, knowing this was just the opening move. They'd be back, angrier, more careful, probably with a better plan. The canyon fell silent again, except for the wounded horse's labored breathing. Rhett considered putting it out of its misery, decided against it. Every bullet might matter before this was over. He reloaded the Winchester, checked the Colt, settled in to wait. The light was failing now, sunset painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold that would have been beautiful if they weren't also counting down to darkness. Once full night fell, they could rush him from multiple angles, use the shadows for cover. He needed to end this before then. But first, they needed to commit. To bring everyone they had, every gun Hale could muster, all focused on this one spot, which meant he needed to make them angry enough to stop thinking and start attacking. Rhett took a breath, then called out into the growing darkness. "Tell Hale he should have paid better. These men you sent, they die cheap." Silence. Then, from somewhere beyond the canyon entrance, the tall man's voice came back. "You're a dead man, Calder." "Maybe. But I'll have plenty of company when I go." Rhett smiled without humor. "How many of you want to be first through that entrance when I've got a rifle in high ground?" No answer, which was answer enough. He'd hurt them. Not enough to stop them, but enough to make them reconsider how they'd do this, which was exactly what he needed. Time for Elena to make her move while Hale's entire attention was focused on a canyon 12 miles west of town. Rhett settled back against the rock, watching twilight deepen toward night, and wondered if he'd live long enough to know whether any of this had mattered. The answer, he suspected, would come soon enough. Full darkness came like a curtain dropping, and with it the temperature plummeted. Rhett could see his breath now, small clouds of vapor that dissipated into the canyon's cold air. His ribs had stiffened up during the wait, the wound pulling with each inhale, reminding him that his body was still trying to heal from damage he kept refusing to acknowledge. He'd been on the ledge for 3 hours. No movement from beyond the canyon entrance, no sound except wind moving through the rock formations and the occasional skitter of falling pebbles. But they were out there, waiting, planning, gathering reinforcements. The wounded horse had finally gone quiet about an hour ago, which meant it had either recovered enough to stand or died where it fell. Rhett suspected the latter. He shifted position carefully, trying to work blood back into legs that had gone numb from sitting still. The movement sent a spike of pain through his ribs that made his vision blur for a second. When it cleared, he found himself thinking about Elena again, wondering if she'd made it to Harrisville, if she'd found Marshall Coleman, if any of this desperate gamble was actually working, or if he was just sitting in a box canyon waiting to die for nothing. "You still breathing up there, Calder?" The voice came from the darkness beyond the entrance, different from before. Younger, with an edge of uncertainty that suggested whoever was speaking hadn't been part of the first assault. Rhett considered not answering, then decided there was no point in silence now. "Still breathing. That's real unfortunate. For you, I mean." "Is it?" A pause. Then, "We got 10 men out here now. Maybe more coming. You got what, 1 rifle and a pistol? How long you think you can hold us off?" "Long enough." "Long enough for what? There's no rescue coming. No one even knows you're here except us and Mr. Hale." Rhett smiled in the darkness. That was the part they didn't understand. Being alone was the whole point. Every man Hale sent to this canyon was one less man watching for Elena in Harrisville. "You boys getting paid well for this?" he called out. "Or did Hale promise you a cut of something that doesn't belong to him?" "We're getting paid fine. Hope it's enough to cover burial costs. I've already put 3 of you down. How many more you want to add to that count before someone with sense calls this off?" Big talk from a man who's trapped. "Funny thing about traps," Rhett said. "Sometimes you don't know who's caught until it's too late." That bought him another stretch of silence. He could almost hear them arguing out there, debating approaches, trying to figure out how to dig him out without losing more men. The smart play would be to wait for daylight when they could see what they were shooting at. But smart and angry didn't always go together, and he'd made a point of making them angry. Movement caught his eye. A flicker of shadow against shadow near the canyon entrance. Someone testing the approach, seeing if he was still alert. Rhett put a round into the dirt 10 feet ahead of the movement. The shadow jerked back with a curse, and he heard scrambling in the darkness. "Next one won't be a warning," Rhett called out. "You're just wasting ammunition." "I've got plenty to waste." He didn't, actually. Maybe 40 rounds left for the Winchester, another 20 for the Colt. Enough for a sustained fight, but not enough to hold off 10 or more men indefinitely. But they didn't need to know that. Another hour crawled by. Rhett's entire body had started to protest the cold and the stillness, muscles cramping, wound throbbing with a steady rhythm that matched his pulse. He allowed himself small movements, flexing fingers, rolling shoulders, anything to keep from seizing up completely. If they rushed him now, he needed to be able to move fast. The attack, when it came from 3 directions at once. They'd split up, circled around to either side of the canyon, and now they came in low and fast, 2 from the left, 2 from the right, and at least 3 straight through the entrance. Coordinated, committed, accepting that some of them would die but betting that numbers would win. Rhett's first shot took the lead man through the entrance in the chest. He went down hard, tripping the man behind him. The Winchester's lever worked smoothly. Chamber, aim, fire. A second man down on the left flank, spinning away, clutching his shoulder. Then they were inside his effective range, and things got messy. He switched to the Colt, firing faster, less precisely, just trying to create enough chaos to break their momentum. Someone returned fire, and the bullet whined past his ear, close enough to feel the displaced air. Another round sparked off rock inches from his hand. One of the attackers made it to the base of the ledge, started climbing. Rhett leaned over the edge and put 2 rounds into him at point-blank range. The man fell backward, landed wrong, didn't get up. "Pull back," someone shouted. "Pull back now!" They retreated again, dragging wounded, leaving more bodies behind. Rhett counted 4 down this time, 2 dead or close to it, 2 injured badly enough they'd be out of the fight. But his ammunition situation had just gotten serious. Maybe 20 rifle rounds left, a dozen for the pistol, and his hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash mixing with cold and exhaustion and pain that was becoming harder to ignore. He reloaded both weapons with fingers that didn't want to cooperate properly, dropping a cartridge that pinged off rock and disappeared into darkness below. When he was done, he pressed his hand against his ribs and felt wetness. The wound had reopened, not badly, but enough. Blood soaking through Silas's careful bandaging. "Calder," a new voice this time, older and harder. "This is Dale Mercer. I'm the foreman of Mr. Hale's operation. He sent me to give you one last chance. Rhett knew the name. Mercer was Hale's right hand, the man who handled problems that required violence instead of paperwork. If Mercer was here, that meant Hale was taking this seriously, which meant Elena had their full attention somewhere else. I'm listening, Rhett called back, buying time to catch his breath. You come out now, hands up, we'll make it quick. Bullet to the head, over in a second. You keep fighting, and when we finally dig you out, and we will dig you out, it'll be slow, real slow. Tempting offer. I'm serious, Calder. This doesn't have to be torture. Here's a counteroffer, Rhett said. You and all of Hale's men turn around, ride back to wherever you came from, and find honest work. Then nobody else has to die tonight. Mercer laughed, but there was no humor in it. You killed 7 of my men. You really think I'm walking away? 7? Rhett had counted 5, maybe 6. You're padding the numbers. 7 dead, 4 wounded, and every single one of them costs Hale money and costs me reputation. Mercer's voice had gone cold. So no, I'm not walking away. I'm going to smoke you out of that hole, and then I'm going to make you wish you'd taken the bullet when I offered it. Well then. Rhett settled back against the rock, ignoring the way his vision kept trying to tunnel. Guess we know where we stand. Last chance, Calder. Already gave you my answer. Another silence fell, longer this time. Rhett used it to assess his situation honestly. He was hurt worse than he'd admitted, bleeding again, running low on ammunition and lower on strength. When they came next time, and they would come, he might not be able to stop them. But he'd held them here for hours now. Long enough for Elena to make her move if she was going to make it. Long enough for Silas to find her, warn her, help her get to Coleman. Long enough to matter. That would have to be enough. He must have drifted for a moment because the next thing he knew, smoke was curling into the canyon. Not from gunfire. This was thick, acrid, wrong. They were burning something at the entrance, using the canyon's natural chimney effect to drive smoke toward his position. Rhett pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth, but it barely helped. The smoke kept coming, getting thicker, stealing oxygen and replacing it with heat and chemical taste. His eyes began to water, his lungs to burn. They were trying to suffocate him out. He fired blind toward where he thought the entrance was, heard the bullets ricochet uselessly off stone. Fired again. The Winchester's magazine went dry and he switched to the Colt, squeezing off rounds just to make them keep their distance. But the smoke kept building, and now he could hear them moving in the darkness below, using the cover it provided. Boots on stone, the rustle of clothing, whispered commands. They were coming. Rhett slid down from the ledge, his legs nearly buckling when they took his weight. The smoke was worse down here, thick enough to cut with a knife, and he couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. He moved by feel and memory, putting his back to the canyon wall, trying to find a position that gave him some advantage. A shape loomed out of the smoke to his left. He fired twice, heard a grunt and a fall. Another shape from the right. He spun, pulled the trigger, heard the Colt's hammer fall on an empty chamber. Empty. He'd lost count, burned through ammunition faster than he'd realized, and now he was holding an expensive paperweight while armed men closed in through the smoke. The shape rushed him, and Rhett did the only thing he could. He used the Colt as a club, swinging it hard into where he hoped the man's head was. Connected with something solid, felt bone give way, and the attacker went down. But there were more coming. He could hear them, converging on the sound of the fight. Rhett dropped the empty pistol and grabbed for the Winchester, worked the lever, remembered too late it was also empty. Threw it at the next shadow that appeared. Heard it clatter off rock and a man curse. Then hands grabbed him from behind, arms wrapping around his chest, squeezing his injured ribs. White-hot agony exploded through his torso and he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel pain that turned the world inside out. He slammed his head backward, felt it connect with someone's face, heard a satisfying crunch. The grip loosened and he spun, drove his elbow into soft tissue, broke free. But his legs weren't working right anymore. He stumbled, went down hard on one knee, tried to rise and couldn't. The smoke, the blood loss, the pain. It was all catching up at once, his body finally calling in debts he couldn't pay. More hands grabbed him. He fought them, landed a few more hits, but there were too many and he was too weak. They drove him down into the dirt, someone's knee and his back, his arms wrenched behind him hard enough that his shoulder screamed. "Got him!" someone shouted. "We got him!" The smoke was starting to clear now, pulled away by the canyon's natural ventilation. Rhett could see boots surrounding him, could feel blood running from his nose where someone had hit him, could taste copper and dirt. They hauled him upright, zip-tied his wrist behind his back tight enough to cut circulation. His vision swam, and for a second he thought he might pass out, almost welcomed it. But consciousness held stubbornly on. Dale Mercer emerged from the last wisps of smoke, his face hard as the canyon walls around them. He walked up to Rhett, studied him for a long moment, then backhanded him across the face hard enough to snap his head sideways. "That's for my men," Mercer said quietly. "The ones you killed." Rhett spit blood and looked him in the eye. "Should have sent better men." Mercer hit him again, this time with a closed fist that drove into his injured ribs. The pain was catastrophic, turning the world white and empty for several seconds. When it came back, Rhett was on his knees in the dirt, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Tough guy," Mercer said. "Let's see how tough you are in a few hours." They dragged him to his feet, started hauling him toward the canyon entrance. Rhett's legs barely worked, his boots dragging furrows in the dirt. The bodies of the men he'd killed were still scattered across the ground, dark shapes in the darkness that spoke to costs he'd extracted. But it hadn't been enough. They'd won, and he'd lost. And now whatever happened to Elena would happen without him there to help. They reached the canyon entrance, and Rhett saw what they'd burned to create all that smoke, a pile of green wood and damp brush still smoldering. Simple, effective, the kind of tactic that worked because it was basic enough that no one thought to defend against it. Horses waited in the darkness beyond, at least a dozen of them. More men than he'd realized, more than he'd had any hope of stopping. They just kept coming, absorbing losses, until sheer numbers overwhelmed his position. Mercer gestured, and they threw Rhett face down across a horse's saddle, tied his legs under its belly. The position pulled at his ribs, made breathing an exercise in deciding how much pain he could tolerate. Blood from his reopened wound ran down his side, warm against cold skin. "Where are we going?" he managed. "Harrisville," Mercer said. "Mr. Hale wants to look you in the eye before we finish this." Harrisville. Which meant Hale was still there. Which meant maybe, possibly, Elena had made it, had gotten to Coleman before Hale could stop her. Or it meant Hale had already caught her and was taking his time celebrating the victory. The horse started moving, and Rhett closed his eyes, tried to find a position that hurt less, failed. Every step the horse took jarred his ribs, sent fresh spikes of agony through his torso. He focused on breathing, just breathing, keeping air moving in and out even when his body wanted to quit. The ride took forever and no time at all. Rhett drifted in and out, consciousness becoming slippery, unreliable. Sometimes he was on the horse. Sometimes he was back in the canyon, fighting men who came at him like shadows. Sometimes he was with Elena, except it was 3 weeks ago, and they were still planning the route to Harrisville, still believing they might actually pull this off. "You'll get me there safe?" she'd asked, looking at him with eyes that had seen too much loss already. "Safe as I can manage," he'd answered, which was the most honest thing he could say. "That'll have to be enough." Except it hadn't been. He'd gotten separated, gotten cornered, gotten captured, and now he was being delivered to Marcus Hale like a trophy while Elena what? The horse stopped. Voices nearby, talking, arguing. Rhett tried to focus, but the words slid around like water, refusing to form meaning. Then hands were untying the ropes, pulling him down from the saddle. His legs wouldn't support him, and he collapsed, would have hit the ground if someone hadn't caught him. They half carried, half dragged him into a building. Lamplight now, warm and yellow and too bright after hours in darkness. Rhett squeezed his eyes shut against it, tried to get his bearings. When he opened them, he was in what looked like an office. Desk, chairs, filing cabinets, maps on the walls showing property boundaries and railroad routes. A big window facing the street, currently covered with heavy curtains. And sitting behind the desk, looking for all the world like a legitimate businessman conducting normal business, was Marcus Hale. He was younger than Rhett had expected, maybe 45, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples and eyes that calculated everything they saw. Well-dressed, well-groomed, the kind of man who'd fit perfectly in a fancy hotel or a territorial legislature. Nothing about him screamed villain except the way he looked at Rhett, like something he'd scraped off his boot. "Mr. Calder," Hale said, his voice cultured, almost gentle. "We finally meet." Rhett didn't answer. He was too busy trying to figure out where he was, what building this was. The land office, he realized after a moment. They'd brought him to the land office where Hale had forged so many documents, stolen so much property. The irony wasn't lost on him. "You've caused me considerable trouble," Hale continued. "7 men dead. 4 more injured seriously enough they're useless to me now. Do you know what that costs? Not just the money I paid them, but the time, the effort, the reputation damage of failing to handle 1 wounded man efficiently." "Should have sent 12 men instead of 11, Rhett said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Is that supposed to be wit? Defiance? I can never tell with men like you." "Men like me. Men who think honor means something, who throw their lives away for principles that won't matter when they're dead." Hale stood, walked around the desk, studying Rhett like a specimen. "You could have just kept writing, could have stayed out of this entirely. Elena Vargas's crusade didn't have to become yours. She asked for help, and you gave it, despite knowing it would probably kill you. That's the part I don't understand." Hale shook his head. "What did you think would happen? That you'd ride into town, hand some papers to the marshal, and suddenly everything would change? That the law would actually care about a few forged deeds and some dead ranchers? Worth finding out. Except you didn't find out, did you? You're here, bleeding on my floor, while Elena Vargas—" Hale paused, letting the words hang. "Well, let's just say her story ends differently than she hoped." Something cold settled in Rhett's stomach. "What did you do?" "Nothing yet. But she's in the jail across the street, waiting for the territorial marshal to arrive tomorrow and decide what to do with a woman who's been making wild accusations against respected citizens." Hale's smile widened slightly. "Turns out Marshal Coleman is reasonable when approached correctly. Very concerned about maintaining order, avoiding false claims that might damage Harrisville's reputation. He's in your pocket. He's practical. There's a difference." Hale returned to his desk, sat down, steepled his fingers. "Elena brought her evidence, yes. 6 years of carefully documented theft, fraud, murder. Very thorough, very convincing." Rhett's heart was beating too fast, his breath coming shallow. Then she won. Then she miscalculated. Hale opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, dropped it on the desk with a heavy thud. All her evidence, all her proof, currently sitting in Coleman's safe waiting for the territorial marshal to arrive. Except the territorial marshal is a colleague of mine. We've worked together on several land acquisitions. When he arrives tomorrow, he'll review the evidence, determine it's largely circumstantial, and rule that while some irregularities may have occurred, there's insufficient cause for prosecution. That's not justice. That's reality. Hale's expression hardened. "You think the law works the way stories say it does? That good defeats evil because it's supposed to? The law works for whoever can afford to make it work. And I can afford a great deal." Rhett wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but his body had nothing left. He slumped in the chair they'd put him in, feeling blood still leaking from his wound, feeling consciousness starting to slip again. "What happens now?" he managed. "Now? Dale takes you somewhere quiet and handles the problem you represent, quick and clean. I'm not cruel." Hale glanced at Mercer, who stood near the door. "Elena will be released tomorrow after the territorial marshal clears me. She'll go back to her ranch, broken and quiet, and if she's smart, she'll sell to me for pennies on the dollar and leave this territory entirely. And if she's not smart, then she'll have an accident." Hale said it casually, like discussing the weather. Like her husband did. These things happen. Rage surged through Rhett's exhaustion, giving him enough strength to try standing. He made it halfway before Mercer's hand on his shoulder shoved him back down. "Easy," Mercer said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rhett looked at Hale, at this man who'd built an empire on stolen land and dead witnesses, and understood completely why Miguel had spent his last breath asking Elena to fight. Because men like Hale only stopped when someone made them stop. "Elena won't quit," Rhett said. "Even if you kill me. Even if the territorial marshal sides with you. She'll find another way. Perhaps." Hale stood again, walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside slightly to look out at the dark street. "But after tomorrow, no one will believe her. She'll just be the grieving widow who couldn't accept that sometimes accidents happen and land changes hands legally." He let the curtain fall back. People forget. Given enough time, even the truth becomes just another story nobody quite remembers. A knock at the door interrupted whatever Hale might have said next. He frowned, glanced at Mercer. "We're busy," Mercer called. "It's important," a voice answered from outside. "Real important." Mercer looked to Hale, who nodded. Mercer opened the door and a young man stumbled in, breathing hard like he'd been running. "What?" Mercer demanded. "It's the woman," the young man gasped. "Vargas. She's gone." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What do you mean, gone?" Hale's voice had gone very quiet. "The jail. Someone broke her out. Coleman's deputy is dead, doors wide open, and she's just gone." Hale's face went completely still, emotions shutting down behind a mask of control. But Rhett could see calculation happening behind his eyes, plans reforming, adjusting. "When?" Hale asked. "Maybe 20 minutes ago. We just found 20 minutes. Hale cut him off, thinking. "She's still in town. Has to be. Get everyone we have, search every building, every alley, find her." "Already started, but what?" The young man swallowed hard. "There's talk. Some of the townsfolk are out in the street, saying they heard something about evidence against you, saying maybe Coleman's been protecting the wrong people." Hale's jaw tightened. "Who's saying this?" "Don't know. But it's spreading. People are upset." For the first time, Rhett saw something crack in Hale's composure. Not fear exactly, more like the recognition that a situation had become complicated in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Find Vargas," Hale said, his voice hard. "Now, and find out who broke her out." The young man nodded, disappeared back through the door. Mercer looked at Hale. "You want me to handle this?" "No, I want you to handle him." Hale gestured at Rhett without looking at him. "Get him out of here. Finish it." "What about the woman?" "I'll deal with Elena Vargas myself." Hale's attention was already shifting, moving to the window again, watching whatever was happening in the street. "Just make sure Calder doesn't become another problem." Mercer grabbed Rhett's arm, hauled him upright. The movement sent fresh agony through his ribs, and he gasped, vision graying. "Come on," Mercer said, dragging him toward a back door. "Time to go." They were halfway across the room when the front window exploded inward in a shower of glass. Something heavy crashed through, hit the floor, bounced once. Rhett's mind, sluggish from pain and blood loss, took a second to process what he was seeing. A rock. Someone had thrown a rock through the window. Then voices from outside, angry, growing louder. "Come out here, Hale! We know what you did! Murderer!" Hale spun toward the window, his face going pale. "What the hell is this?" More rocks came through, more shouts. The crowd was growing, fed by something. Anger, information, truth finally breaking surface after years of being buried. Mercer looked torn between dealing with Rhett and protecting Hale. In that moment of hesitation, Rhett made his move. He drove his shoulder into Mercer's gut, ignored the explosion of pain from his ribs, used his body weight to knock the bigger man off balance. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, and Rhett, hand still zip-tied behind his back, brought his knee up hard into Mercer's groin. Mercer's grip loosened, and Rhett rolled away, scrambled toward the back door on adrenaline and desperation. His hands were useless, but his legs still worked, barely, and he crashed through the door into an alley behind the building. Cold night air hit him like a slap. He staggered forward, trying to orient himself, trying to figure out which way to run. Then someone grabbed him from the shadows, and he almost screamed before he recognized the voice. "Easy, it's me!" Silas. The old man had a knife out, was already cutting the zip ties. "Can you walk?" "Barely." "Good enough." Silas got the ties off, helped Rhett to his feet. "We need to move. Elena's got half the town ready to riot, but it won't last long if Hale's men start shooting." "Elena's alive." "Very much so. She's also very insistent about making sure you don't die before this is over." Silas started moving, half supporting Rhett as they navigated the dark alley. "Come on, we've got maybe 5 minutes before they realize you're gone and organize a proper search." Behind them, the shouts from the street were getting louder, angrier. The sound of something burning, glass breaking, chaos spreading like wildfire through a town that had been silent too long. Rhett stumbled along beside Silas, his body barely functioning, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Elena had made it, had gotten her evidence to someone, somehow, had turned the tide, and now, impossibly, he was still alive to see it. They turned a corner, and there she was, Elena Vargas, standing in the doorway of what looked like a church, her face illuminated by lamplight from within. When she saw Rhett, something crossed her expression. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. You're alive, she said. Keep surprising myself that way, Rhett managed. She looked at Silas. Coleman? Still deciding which side his bread's buttered on, Silas said. But the crowd's making it real clear what they think of Hale. Then we need to finish this. Elena's voice was steady, determined. Tonight, before Hale can run or buy his way out. Rhett wanted to tell her it was over, that she'd done enough, that she should let someone else take the risk from here. But looking at her face, at the resolve written in every line, he knew she'd never accept that. This had been her fight from the beginning. She'd earned the right to finish it. What do you need? He asked instead. I need the territorial marshal to actually see what's happening here, to see that this isn't just one woman's vendetta. She looked back into the church, where Rhett could now see people gathered. A dozen, maybe more. These people lost family, lost land, lost everything to Hale's operation. They're ready to testify, ready to demand justice. And if the marshal doesn't listen? Elena's smile was hard as iron. Then Harrisville's about to have a very public conversation about corruption and murder. And Hale's going to discover that you can't forge your way out of a riot. From the street came the sound of more breaking glass, more shouting. The situation was balancing on a knife's edge. It could tip toward justice or toward violence, and which way it fell would be decided in the next hour. Rhett looked at Elena, at Silas, at the people gathering in the church who'd been silent for too long. Then let's make sure he hears every word, Rhett said. And despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, despite every reason to quit, he felt something almost like hope beginning to kindle in his chest. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in days they had a real chance of winning it. Elena led them into the church, and Rhett found himself in a space that hadn't seen regular worship in years, but still held on to the bones of what it had been. Wooden pews lined both sides of a narrow aisle, most of them pushed against the walls now to create an open area in the center. Lamplight flickered from sconces on the walls, casting long shadows that made the gathered faces look carved from stone. There were maybe 15 people inside, men and women ranging from their 20s to their 60s, all wearing the kind of worn clothes that spoke to hard work and harder times. They looked at Rhett with expressions that mixed curiosity and suspicion, probably wondering if this bleeding stranger was going to help or hurt their cause. "This is Rhett Calder," Elena said, her voice carrying in the quiet space. "He's the reason I'm alive to be standing here." An older woman with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun stepped forward. "He looks half dead himself." "3/4 maybe," Rhett admitted, leaning heavily against a pew. His ribs were screaming and his vision kept trying to tunnel, but he forced himself to stay upright. But still functional. "For how long?" The woman's eyes were sharp, assessing. "You're bleeding through your shirt." Silas moved to Rhett's side, helped ease him down onto a pew. "He'll hold together long enough. Question is, what's the plan here?" Elena moved to the front of the church, turned to face the gathered group. In the lamplight, she looked older than her 30-some years, worn down by grief and fighting, but there was steel in her spine that wouldn't bend. "The plan," she said, "is to make Hale answer for what he's done. To every person in this room. To every family that lost land or loved ones. To this whole territory." "Nice speech," a younger man said from the back. He had a scar running down his left cheek and arms that suggested years of hard labor. "But Coleman's already got your evidence locked up, waiting for his friend the territorial marshal to arrive and sweep it all under a rug. How do you plan on changing that?" "By making it impossible to ignore." Elena's gaze swept across the room. "Coleman thinks he can wait this out, let things settle down, go back to taking Hale's money. He's counting on people being too scared or too tired to keep fighting." "Some of us are tired," an older man said quietly. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in the sun. "Been fighting 3 years now. Lost my ranch, lost my son who tried to stand up to Hale's men. At some point, you gotta ask if it's worth it." "Is it?" Elena asked, not unkindly. "Is it worth letting Hale win? Letting your son's death mean nothing?" The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. "I'm not asking anyone to do something I won't do myself," Elena continued. "But here's the truth. If we walk away now, Hale keeps everything he stole. Every acre of land, every drop of blood, every life he ruined. And he'll do it again to the next group of people who get in his way." "So what do we do?" the gray-haired woman asked. "Storm the land office? Break into Coleman's safe? That's just giving Hale an excuse to have us all arrested or shot. No, Elena said. We make the territorial marshal's job impossible to ignore. When he arrives tomorrow— Tomorrow's too late, Silas interrupted. Hale's already organizing his men. Once he gets control of the street, he'll hunt down everyone in this room, and this whole thing ends bloody. Then we don't wait for tomorrow. Elena's voice was firm. We bring the marshal here tonight. That got everyone's attention. How? The scarred man asked. Last I heard, territorial marshal's still 2 days' ride south. He was, Elena said, until I sent Silas to find him 3 days ago with a message that there was an urgent situation in Harrisville requiring immediate attention. Silas nodded. Met him on the road yesterday morning. Told him there was evidence of massive land fraud and multiple murders. He's been riding hard since then. So where is he? Rhett asked, trying to follow the conversation through the fog of pain. About 2 hours outside town, last I checked. Should be arriving right around midnight. Silas pulled out a pocket watch, checked it. Which gives us maybe 90 minutes to make sure Hale doesn't kill everyone here or burn the evidence before the marshal walks into this mess. A heavy silence settled over the church. 90 minutes to hold off a man with money, guns, and the local law in his pocket. The mathematics weren't encouraging. Hale's got maybe 15-20 men still functional, the scarred man said, plus Coleman and his remaining deputy. We've got, 20 people total if we count everyone who's willing to fight? And most of us aren't exactly trained gunfighters. Don't need to be, Rhett said, forcing himself to think tactically despite his body's protests. Just need to make it impossible for Hale to do what he wants to do. Which is? Kill Elena, destroy the evidence, and scatter the rest of you before the marshal arrives. Rhett looked at Elena. He can't afford to have the territorial marshal see what's actually happening here, so he needs to manufacture a different story. Say, there was a riot, dangerous criminals. He was just defending his property. Self-defense, the gray-haired woman said with bitter recognition. Same excuse he used when my husband died. Exactly. But that only works if we're scattered and picked off one by one. Rhett gestured at the church around them. Here, together, we're witnesses. We're a story that's harder to rewrite. We're also trapped, the older man pointed out. This building's got 2 doors and maybe 8 windows. Hale bottles us up in here, we can't get out. Then we don't let him bottle us up. Silas was already moving toward the front door, checking sight lines. We control the street. Make it loud. Make it public. Make sure anyone watching knows exactly what's happening. There's maybe 30 people already out there, Elena said. Shopkeepers, families, people who've been keeping quiet because they were afraid. I told them what Hale did, showed them copies of some of the evidence. They're angry enough to make noise. Angry enough to stand between Hale's guns and this church? The scarred man asked skeptically. Some of them, maybe. Others will run the second shooting starts. Elena's expression was pragmatic, honest. But even the ones who run will talk, will tell others what they saw, and that's worth something. Rhett could see what she was building toward. Not a military victory, but a narrative one. Making it impossible for Hale to control the story of what happened tonight. We need someone to get to Coleman, Rhett said. Make him understand that protecting Hale tonight means going down with him when the territorial marshal arrives. I'll go, the gray-haired woman said. Coleman's wife and I used to be friends, back before he decided money mattered more than people. Maybe I can remind him what happens to corrupt lawmen when the territory finds out. Take someone with you, Silas said, just in case. The younger man with the scar stepped forward. I'll go. Figure I owe Coleman a conversation anyway, after what happened to my sister. They headed out into the night, leaving the rest to prepare for whatever was coming. Elena organized people into positions, some at the windows watching for Hale's approach, others gathering anything that could be used as a weapon or barricade. It was improvised, chaotic, the kind of desperate preparation that happened when time ran out and options narrowed to nothing. Rhett tried to help, but his body had reached its limit. When he attempted to stand, his legs folded and he would have hit the floor if Silas hadn't caught him. Easy, the old man said, easing him back onto the pew. You've done your part. Now let others do theirs. Can't just sit here. You can and you will, because if you try to fight in your condition, you'll get yourself killed and probably someone else too. Silas pulled bandages from his pack, started checking Rhett's wound. Besides, someone needs to make sure the territorial marshal gets the full story when he arrives. Can't do that if you're dead. The wound had opened completely, blood soaking through the old bandages. Silas worked quickly, cleaning it with whiskey that made Rhett's vision white out for several seconds, then wrapping it tight with fresh cloth. "This is bad," Silas said quietly. "You need a real doctor, not field medicine from an old scout." "After." "There might not be an after if you don't—" "After," Rhett repeated more firmly. "Whatever happens in the next 2 hours happens. Then we worry about after." Silas looked like he wanted to argue, then just sighed and tied off the bandage. Stubborn doesn't even begin to cover it. Learned from the best. Rhett managed a weak smile. 3 days ago, you were hunting me for money. Now you're patching me up in a church while we wait for a fight we'll probably lose. What changed? Maybe I got tired of being on the wrong side. Silas sat back, studied his handiwork. Or maybe I just realized that if I'm going to die, I'd rather it mean something. Fair enough. Elena came over, crouched down beside the pew. Up close, Rhett could see the exhaustion in her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the weight of carrying this fight for so long finally showing through. "You should have kept riding," she said softly, "when we got separated. You should have saved yourself. Wouldn't have made any difference. They would have caught you eventually. Maybe. But you wouldn't be bleeding out in a church waiting for men with guns to kick down the door." "Elena." Rhett reached out, took her hand. It was smaller than he'd expected, calloused from years of ranch work, trembling slightly. "I made a choice to help you, knew the risks, would make the same choice again." "Why?" Her eyes searched his face. "Why would you throw your life away for someone else's fight?" "Because it stopped being someone else's fight the moment I understood what you were fighting for." Rhett squeezed her hand gently. "Miguel asked you to finish what he started. You asked me to help you get here. Now we're here, and whatever happens next, at least we got this far. Getting here isn't enough. We have to win. We will." "You don't know that." "No," Rhett admitted, "but I know you, and I know you won't quit until either Hale's finished or you are. So we might as well bet on you." Elena's expression flickered, something between gratitude and grief. "Miguel would have liked you, would have said you were too reckless for your own good, but he would have liked you anyway." High praise from a dead man. The highest. She stood but didn't let go of his hand immediately. "Stay alive, Rhett, at least long enough to see how this ends." Planning on it. She'd finally released his hand and moved back to the front of the church where she could see the street. Silas settled onto the pew beside Rhett, both of them watching the preparations continue around them. "You love her," Silas said. "It wasn't a question." "Yeah." "She know?" "Probably. Doesn't matter." "Might matter to her." Rhett shook his head. "She loved Miguel, still loves him. I'm just the guy who helped her keep a promise. When this is over, she'll go back to her ranch, and I'll go back to wherever men like me go." "Men like you. Men who live by the gun and die the same way." Rhett's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "I've known what I was since I was 20 years old. This—" He gestured vaguely at the church, at Elena, at everything they were trying to do. "This is borrowed time, a chance to do something that matters before the bill comes due." That's a depressing way to look at things. "It's realistic." "It's stupid," Silas said bluntly. "You think you don't deserve better because of what you've done, where you've been, but everyone deserves a chance to be more than their worst moments." Before Rhett could respond, someone at the window called out, "They're coming!" Everyone moved at once, taking positions, readying whatever weapons they had. Rhett forced himself to stand, ignoring the way his vision grayed and his ribs screamed. Silas handed him a pistol, one of the ones they'd taken from dead bounty hunters back in the canyon. 6 rounds, Silas said. "Make them count." Through the window, Rhett could see movement in the street. Torches first, carried by men on horseback. Then more figures, at least a dozen, spreading out to surround the church. At the center of the group, still mounted while others took positions, was Marcus Hale. He looked different now than he had in the land office. Less composed, more dangerous. The mask of civilization was slipping, revealing the kind of man who'd built an empire on stolen ground and dead witnesses. "Elena Vargas," Hale's voice carried in the night air. "I know you're in there. You and everyone foolish enough to stand with you." Elena moved to the door, opened it just enough to be seen, but not enough to be an easy target. "I'm here, Hale, and I'm not going anywhere. You should reconsider. Last chance to walk away from this." Same offer, I'll make you, Elena called back. Surrender yourself to the territorial marshal when he arrives. Face what you've done. Hale laughed, and the sound was ugly. The territorial marshal is my friend. Has been for years. Whatever story you've concocted, whatever lies you've spread, they won't stand up to scrutiny. Then you've got nothing to worry about. Elena's voice was steady, unwavering. Let him come. Let him review the evidence. Let him make his determination. The evidence you stole from Marshal Coleman's office? That evidence? Hale shifted in his saddle. Breaking and entering, assaulting a deputy, inciting a riot. You're the criminal here, Elena, not me. Tell that to the families you destroyed, the people you killed, accidents and business transactions. All legal, all documented. Hale's tone sharpened. You want to play this game? Fine. I've got 20 armed men surrounding that church. I've got the local law on my side. And I've got all the time in the world to wait you out. Do you? Elena asked. Because I've got something you need. Something that burns real easy if you try to force your way in here. A pause. Then, you're bluffing. Am I? You want to take that risk? All those forged deeds, all those witness statements, all that evidence that proves exactly what you are. You really want to bet it all on me being too scared to light a match? Rhett could see the calculation happening on Hale's face, even from a distance. He was weighing options, measuring risks, trying to figure out if Elena was serious. What do you want? Hale finally asked. I want you to wait for the territorial marshal. I want a fair hearing, and I want everyone in this church to walk out alive when this is over. In exchange for? In exchange for not burning 6 years of evidence while you watch. Hale considered this, then nodded slowly. All right, we wait. But nobody leaves that church. Anyone tries to run, anyone tries to slip away, we start shooting. Understood? Understood. Hale dismounted, gestured for his men to settle in. They took positions around the church, not quite close enough to rush it, but near enough to make sure nobody escaped. A siege, then. A waiting game. Elena closed the door, turned back to the people inside. We've got maybe an hour before the marshal arrives. Maybe less. We just need to hold on until then. And if Hale decides waiting isn't worth it, the older man asked, then we make him regret that decision. Elena's jaw was set. We didn't come this far to quit now. The hour that followed was the longest of Rhett's life. Not because of action, there was none, but because of the waiting. Watching the torches outside, listening to Hale's men talking among themselves, knowing that any second the situation could explode into violence. Inside the church, people tried to stay calm. Some prayed, though quietly, and to themselves. Others checked weapons, counted ammunition, prepared for a fight that might never come. A few just sat and waited, faces blank with exhaustion or fear or both. Rhett drifted in and out, his body demanding rest it couldn't have. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the canyon again, saw the moment when Mercer's men had overwhelmed him, wondered what would have happened if they'd just killed him there instead of dragging him to Harrisville. Would have been simpler, probably, cleaner, but he wouldn't have seen Elena safe. Wouldn't have known if this desperate plan had any chance of working. "Riders coming!" Someone at the window called out. "From the south!" Everyone tensed. This was it. Either the territorial marshal arriving to change everything, or more of Hale's men coming to end this by force. Through the window, Rhett could see 3 horses approaching at a steady pace. Not rushing, not cautious, just riding with the kind of authority that suggested they had every right to be there. The lead rider was older, maybe 60, with a gray beard and a badge that caught the torchlight. Behind him rode 2 deputies, younger men with rifles across their saddles. The territorial marshal had arrived. Hale moved to meet him, and even from inside the church, Rhett could see the confidence in his posture. This was the moment he'd been counting on, his friend arriving to clean up the mess. They spoke for several minutes, too quietly to hear. Then the marshal dismounted, looked toward the church, and started walking in that direction. Hale moved to follow, but the marshal held up a hand, stopping him. Said something that made Hale's expression tighten. Then the marshal was at the church door, knocking firmly. Elena opened it. "Ma'am," the marshal said. His voice was rough from years of trail dust, but not unkind. "I'm Territorial Marshal James Whitmore. I understand you've got some serious accusations to make." "I do." Elena stepped back. "Come in, see for yourself." Whitmore entered, his deputies flanking him. He took in the gathered people, the makeshift weapons, the general state of siege preparation. His expression gave nothing away. "I've known Marcus Hale for 8 years," he said without preamble. "Done business with him on 3 separate land purchases. He's told me you're a grieving widow who can't accept that your husband died in an accident." "And what do you think?" Elena asked. "I think I've ridden 2 days straight to get here because someone told me there was evidence of systematic fraud and murder. So before I decide anything, I want to see that evidence." Whitmore looked around the room. "Anyone have it?" The gray-haired woman stepped forward. She was breathing hard, like she'd been running. "We do. Got it from Coleman's office about 20 minutes ago." She produced a thick folder, handed it to Whitmore. The marshal took it, moved to where the lamplight was better, and started reading. The silence stretched. Whitmore read slowly, carefully, occasionally flipping back to recheck something. His expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. After what felt like forever, he closed the folder and looked at Elena. "These deeds," he said, "the ones marked as forgeries, how do you know they're false?" "Because I have the originals. Miguel kept copies of everything before Hale started altering records." Elena produced another folder, thinner than the first. "Every property listed in that file, I can show you the real deed versus the forged one." Whitmore took that folder too, compared documents side by side. His jaw tightened as he read. A small tell that suggested something in what he was seeing troubled him. "These witness statements," he said, still reading. "Claims of murder, intimidation, arson. Any of these people still alive to testify?" "7 of them are in this room right now," Elena said. "Others scattered across the territory, afraid to come forward because they thought no one would believe them." "Would you have believed them?" the older man asked quietly. "Before tonight, would you have looked at this evidence and seen the truth? Or would you have called us liars and moved on?" Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. "Honest answer, I don't know. Hale's got a reputation as a hard businessman, but a legal one. I've never had reason to question that." "And now?" "Now I'm reading documents that suggest he's been running a criminal enterprise for the better part of 6 years. Whitmore's voice had gone cold. "If these are real, if this evidence holds up, Hale's looking at charges that carry a death sentence." "They're real," Elena said firmly. "Every page, every signature, every claim." Whitmore closed both folders, handed them to one of his deputies. "Then I need to have a conversation with Marcus Hale." He walked back outside, and everyone in the church crowded to the windows to watch. Rhett forced himself up, leaned against the wall to see. Hale was waiting, confident, probably expecting Whitmore to arrest Elena and call this whole thing a misunderstanding. Instead, Whitmore walked right up to him and said, loudly enough to be heard inside the church, "Marcus Hale, you're under arrest for fraud, murder, and conspiracy. You have the right to—" Hale's hand moved toward his pistol. "Don't!" Whitmore said, and there was steel in his voice now. "Don't make this worse than it already is." For a heartbeat, everything balanced on Hale's decision. His men were watching, hands near weapons. Whitmore's deputies had rifles trained on Hale. The crowd in the street had gone silent, waiting. Then Hale's shoulders sagged and his hand moved away from his gun. "This is a mistake," he said, but the confidence was gone from his voice. "When the territory reviews this case, the territory will review evidence that suggests you've murdered at least 9 people and stolen over 40,000 acres of land." Whitmore's tone was flat, final. "If you're innocent, you'll have your chance to prove it. But right now, you're coming with me." One of the deputies moved forward with manacles, secured Hale's wrist. The watching crowd began to murmur, the sound building. Hale's men looked at each other, uncertain. Their employer was in chains, their purpose suddenly unclear. A few started backing away, melting into the darkness. Others just stood there, waiting for orders that wouldn't come. Inside the church, someone started crying. Someone else laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that spoke to relief and disbelief in equal measure. Elena leaned against the doorframe, her whole body sagging as the tension that had been holding her upright finally released. "It's over," she said quietly. "It's actually over." Rhett wanted to agree, wanted to celebrate, but his body had finally reached the end of what it could give. The world tilted sideways and he felt himself falling, heard someone shout his name, felt hands catching him before he hit the floor. Then darkness, merciful and complete, pulling him down into unconsciousness. He couldn't fight anymore. When Rhett woke, the first thing he registered was that he wasn't dead, which came as a genuine surprise. The second thing was pain, but it was different now, cleaner somehow, the sharp edge dulled by whatever medication someone had given him. The third thing was sunlight, warm on his face, coming through a window he didn't recognize. He opened his eyes slowly, letting them adjust. A bedroom, small but clean. White walls, simple furniture, a quilt that looked hand-stitched covering him to the chest. His torso was wrapped in fresh bandages, professional work that suggested actual medical training rather than Silas's field expedients. "You're awake." Rhett turned his head, carefully, because even dulled the pain was real, and found Elena sitting in a chair beside the bed. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days, but there was something different in her face. The tension that had been carved into every line was gone, replaced by a weariness that was somehow lighter. "How long?" His voice came out as gravel. 3 days. The doctor said you'd lost enough blood to kill most men, but apparently you're too stubborn for that." A hint of a smile crossed her face. "He also said if you'd kept fighting for another hour, you probably wouldn't have made it." "Good timing then. Luck, more like." Elena poured water from a pitcher on the nightstand, helped him drink. The water was cool and tasted like the best thing he'd ever consumed. "Though Silas says there's no such thing as luck, only preparation meeting opportunity." "Where is he?" "Out at my ranch, helping repair some of the damage Hale's men did over the years. Turns out he's handy with carpentry when he's not tracking people for money." She set the glass down. "He checks in every day to see if you've woken up. Said he has some choice words for you about getting shot repeatedly." Rhett managed something close to a laugh, which hurt but felt good anyway. "I'll look forward to that conversation." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Outside the window, Rhett could hear normal town sounds, horses, wagons, people going about their business. The world continuing on like it always did, indifferent to individual dramas. "What happened?" he asked finally. "After I collapsed." Elena settled back in her chair and her expression shifted into something more serious. "Marshal Whitmore took Hale into custody that night. Had him in chains before most of Hale's men realized what was happening. A few tried to fight. Dale Mercer pulled a gun, got shot by one of Whitmore's deputies, died before morning. And the others? Scattered. Some rode out immediately, probably figured they were better off running than answering questions. Others stuck around and got arrested. Whitmore's been methodical about it, tracking down everyone involved in Hale's operation, building cases against each one." She paused. "Turns out once people started talking, they couldn't stop. Everyone had a story. Everyone had something they'd seen or done or been forced to participate in. Coleman? Arrested the same night, charged with corruption, obstruction of justice, accessory to murder. He's claiming he was intimidated, that Hale threatened his family." Elena's voice went flat. "Maybe that's true. Maybe it's just an excuse. Either way, he's done as a lawman." Red absorbed this, trying to piece together the last 3 days from fragments. The evidence? All authenticated. Whitmore brought in a territorial judge to review everything. Took 2 full days, but the judge confirmed it was legitimate. Every forged deed, every falsified document, every piece of testimony. Something fierce entered Elena's eyes. Miguel's work. 6 years of documenting every crime, every theft. It all mattered. It all counted. And Hale? Trial's set for next month. But the judge already said, based on the evidence, Hale's looking at death by hanging for the murders, plus life imprisonment for the fraud, if somehow the murder charges don't stick. Elena's voice softened slightly. "It's over, Rhett. Actually over." He wanted to feel triumphant, wanted to celebrate, but mostly he just felt tired. "How many people died? Getting to this point?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Too many. Miguel. The families who lost everything before we stopped Hale. Your friend Ash." She looked at her hands. 7 of Hale's men in the canyon and the church. Mercer. Coleman's deputy who tried to stop me from escaping the jail. "Did you kill him? The deputy?" "No, Silas did. Said it was necessary. Said the man was reaching for a gun." She met Rhett's eyes. "I believe him. But I also know that death is on me, my crusade, my fight. All these people died because I couldn't let go." "They died because Hale made choices," Rhett said firmly. "Because he decided land was worth more than lives. You didn't create this situation. You just refused to let it continue. Is there a difference between refusing to stop and causing something to happen? It was a question Rhett had asked himself countless times over the years. Every man he'd killed, every fight he'd chosen, every consequence that rippled out from his decisions. Where was the line between justified action and just another form of violence? I don't know, he admitted. But I know Miguel asked you to finish what he started, and I know that if you hadn't fought, Hale would still be stealing land and killing anyone who stood against him. So maybe the question isn't whether people died. Maybe it's whether their deaths meant something. That's a cold way to look at it. It's an honest way. Elena considered this, then nodded slowly. The families are getting their land back. The territories appointed a new land agent, someone Whitmore vouches for. They're reviewing every transaction Hale made over the past 6 years, returning property to original owners or their heirs. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. People are coming back. Families who left because they thought they had no choice. It's not perfect. Some people are still gone. Some damage can't be undone. But it's better. It's a start. That's what Miguel wanted. I know. Her voice went soft. I can almost hear him saying it. It's not about perfect, Elena. It's about better. Always just a little bit better. Rhett closed his eyes, feeling exhaustion pulling at him again, despite 3 days of unconsciousness. What happens now? To you, I mean. I go back to the ranch. Start rebuilding what Hale destroyed, both the physical structures and the life I had before all this started. She paused. It won't be the same. Can't be. Miguel's gone and that hole doesn't fill in. But the land is still there, the work is still there. And maybe that's enough. It should be. Should be and are 2 different things. Elena stood, moved to the window, looked out at the street below. I keep thinking about what comes after justice. We spent so long fighting to reach this point that I didn't plan for what happens when the fighting's done. Who am I when I'm not fighting Hale? What do I do with days that don't revolve around gathering evidence or staying alive? You live, Rhett said simply. You take each day, and you fill it with whatever feels worth doing. Some days that's ranch work. Some days it's nothing. Eventually you figure out who you are without the fight defining you. Is that what you did? After whatever made you into who you are? Rhett thought about the years that had brought him to that canyon, to Elena, to this moment. No. I let the fighting become who I was. Let it fill up all the space where a normal life might have grown. That's why I recognized what you were risking, because I'd already lost it. And now? Now I'm a man who got shot too many times and is having a philosophical conversation when he should probably be resting. Rhett opened his eyes again, looked at her. But if you're asking whether I regret helping you, whether I wish I'd made different choices, the answer's no. This mattered. You matter. Whatever comes after, at least I know I did one thing worth the cost. Elena turned from the window, and he could see tears in her eyes, though she was fighting to keep them from falling. Thank you for everything, for believing me when you had no reason to, for standing with me when it would have been easier to walk away, for... She stopped, took a breath. For helping me keep my promise to Miguel. You kept that promise yourself. I just provided backup. Important backup. She moved back to the chair, sat down again. The doctor says you'll need at least another week before you can travel, maybe 2. Where will you go? Rhett hadn't thought that far ahead. Don't know. Somewhere with less shooting, probably. You could stay. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them quite knew how to address. Elena, I'm not proposing marriage, she said quickly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Just saying the ranch is big. There's always work that needs doing, and you've proven you're not completely useless with a gun or your hands. She looked at him steadily. Miguel used to say the best ranch hands were the ones running from something, gave them incentive to work hard and keep quiet. I'm not much of a ranch hand. You're not much of a lot of things, but you're here and you're alive, and you helped save everything I have left. Elena's voice went soft. I'm not ready for anything beyond that. Might not be ready for years, but if you need a place to heal, to figure out what comes next, the offer stands. Rhett wanted to say yes immediately. Wanted to grab onto the possibility of something beyond drifting, but he also knew himself well enough to recognize the pattern, getting comfortable, putting down roots, than having his past show up to burn it all down. I'll think about it, he said carefully. After I can stand without falling over. Fair enough. Elena stood again, moved toward the door. I should let you rest. Doctor's coming by this evening to check on you, and Silas will probably show up tomorrow to deliver whatever lecture he's been rehearsing. Looking forward to it. She paused at the door, looked back. Rhett, whatever you decide, wherever you go, know that you gave me something I'd almost lost. Not just the victory over Hale, but the belief that fighting for what's right actually matters. That one person standing up can make a difference. You were already standing. I was falling, she corrected, and you caught me long enough that I could find my balance again. That counts for something. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Rhett alone with his thoughts and the warm sunlight and the strange feeling of something that might be hope trying to take root in his chest. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Mornings were for healing, letting his body do the slow work of knitting torn muscle and replacing lost blood. The doctor, an older man named Brennan, who'd seen enough bullet wounds to write a textbook, was cautiously optimistic about Rhett's recovery. You should have died 3 times over, Brennan said during one of his evening visits. Blood loss, infection, shock. Any one of them could have finished you. That you're sitting here complaining about the food suggests either incredible constitution or pure spite. Can it be both? Usually is with men like you. Brennan rewrapped the wound, which was finally starting to close properly. You're lucky Elena found me when she did. Another few hours and I'd have been planning a funeral instead of recovery. Silas visited on the 4th day, bringing fresh clothes and a bottle of whiskey that Brennan immediately confiscated with a stern lecture about alcohol interfering with healing. The old scout looked better than Rhett had seen him. Rested, purposeful, like the weight of 23 years hunting people for money had finally lifted from his shoulders. You look terrible, Silas said by way of greeting. You look smug, I am smug. I'm alive. I'm not wanted for anything, and I've spent the last few days doing honest work for honest pay. Silas settled into the chair Elena had occupied so many times. Turns out carpentry's more satisfying when you're building instead of just tracking people to buildings. You staying on at the ranch? For now. Elena needs help, and I need something to do that isn't morally questionable. Silas pulled out a pipe, started packing it with tobacco. Besides, turns out I'm good at fixing things. Who knew? They talked for an hour, Silas filling in details about what had happened while Rhett was unconscious. The town's reaction to Hale's arrest, shock, mixing with satisfaction, mixing with fear about what came next. The families returning to reclaim their land. The territorial judge's investigation expanding beyond just Hale to include everyone who'd enabled his operation. It's going to take years to sort out all the damage, Silas said, but it's happening. Real change, not just talk. Because Elena wouldn't let it be just talk. Because she had help when she needed it most. Silas fixed him with a steady look. You did good, Calder. Whatever else happens, remember that. I'll try. Also, Elena says she offered you a job. Rhett shifted uncomfortably, which pulled at his ribs and reminded him why moving too much was still a bad idea. She mentioned something about needing ranch hands. And I'm thinking about it. Think faster. Woman like that doesn't make offers like that to just anyone. I know. Do you? Silas leaned forward, his expression serious. Because from where I'm sitting, you've got a choice between drifting back to whatever life you had before, which, let's be honest, was probably going to get you killed eventually, or staying somewhere you matter to someone who matters to you. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're just making it complicated because you think you don't deserve simple. Rhett didn't have an answer for that, mostly because Silas was right. He'd spent so long believing he was just a man good with a gun, useful in certain situations but fundamentally alone, that the possibility of being something else felt foreign. What if I can't be what she needs? He asked quietly. What if you can? Silas struck a match, lit his pipe. You've spent this whole conversation talking about what you might fail at instead of what you might succeed at. That's fear talking, not sense. Since when did you become a philosopher? Since I spent 3 days watching a woman sit by your bedside when she should have been celebrating victory. Since I realized she wasn't sitting here out of obligation or gratitude. Silas blew out a stream of smoke. She cares about you, Calder. whether either of you is ready to admit it or not. Question is what you're going to do about it. By the end of the first week, Rhett could stand without assistance and walk short distances without his vision tunneling. Brennan pronounced him past the critical danger period, though he emphasized that full recovery would take months and that Rhett should avoid getting shot, stabbed, or beaten for the foreseeable future. "I'll do my best," Rhett said. "Your best historically involves violence," Brennan replied dryly. "Try for someone else's best this time." Elena visited less frequently now, pulled back into the work of rebuilding her ranch and her life. When she did come, their conversations were easier, less weighted with unspoken things. She talked about Miguel sometimes, small memories that surfaced unexpectedly, stories about their life before Hale had torn it apart. "He was terrible at fixing fences," she said during one visit. "Used to get so frustrated when the wire wouldn't cooperate. I'd find him cursing at fence posts in Spanish like they'd personally offended him." Sounds like a man who took his work seriously. He took everything seriously, even the things that didn't deserve it. She smiled at the memory. But he also knew how to laugh, how to find joy in small things. "I think that's what I miss most. Not the grand gestures, but the everyday moments that made life feel full. You'll find that again. Maybe. Different, though. Can't ever be the same. Different isn't always worse." "I know." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Have you decided? About staying?" Rhett had been wrestling with that question for days, turning it over in his mind during the long hours when sleep wouldn't come. The practical arguments were clear. He needed time to fully heal, the ranch needed help, staying would be easier than leaving. But beneath those surface reasons was something deeper, more frightening. The possibility of mattering to someone, of being more than just a gun for hire or a man running from his past, of building something instead of just destroying things. "If I stay," he said carefully, "it needs to be clear what I'm staying as. A ranch hand, someone helping because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm expecting anything more." Elena's expression didn't change. "That's fine." "Is it, Rhett?" She leaned forward slightly. "I love Miguel. Part of me always will. And I'm not ready for anything beyond friendship, if I'm ever ready at all. But that doesn't mean I don't value what we've been through together. Doesn't mean I don't want you around. As a friend. As someone I trust. Someone I respect. Someone who I'd like to have in my life if you're willing to be there." She paused. "Is that enough?" It should have felt like a limitation, like settling for less than he wanted. Instead, it felt like possibility. Like a door opening to something he hadn't known he could have. "Yeah," Rhett said. "That's enough." 2 weeks after waking up, Rhett left the room that had been his recovery ward and walked the streets of Harrisville for the first time since the night of Hale's arrest. The town had changed in subtle ways. People walked with less fear in their shoulders. Shops that had been shuttered were opening again. The general atmosphere had shifted from oppressed to cautiously optimistic. He stopped by the church where they'd made their stand. The door was unlocked, and inside someone had cleaned up all evidence of the siege. Pews were back in their proper rows, the windows had been repaired, and fresh flowers sat in a vase near the altar. "Trying to decide if you're religious?" Rhett turned to find the gray-haired woman who'd gone to confront Coleman that night. She was carrying a broom and wearing a practical dress, clearly in the middle of cleaning. "Just remembering," Rhett said. "Lot happened in here that night." She started sweeping, the sound rhythmic and familiar. "Changed things for a lot of people." "For you?" "For everyone. Whole town spent years being afraid to speak up, afraid to challenge Hale. Then one woman and a handful of strangers showed us it was possible to fight back." She paused in her sweeping. "My husband died 3 years ago. Hale's men killed him, made it look like a robbery. I knew the truth but couldn't prove it, couldn't get anyone to listen. Now Hale's in a cell waiting to hang, and I finally got to tell a judge what really happened." "I'm sorry about your husband." "Me too. But at least his death doesn't have to be meaningless anymore." She resumed sweeping. "That's worth something. Maybe not enough, but something." Rhett left her to her work, walked through town observing the small changes that added up to transformation. New families arriving to reclaim land, a different sheriff wearing the badge Coleman had disgraced. People talking openly about what had happened instead of in fearful whispers. One person standing up had made a difference. But it was the people who'd stood with her that made the difference permanent. He found himself at the land office, now run by a stern-looking woman in her 50s who was systematically reviewing every document Hale had filed. She glanced up when Rhett entered, assessed him quickly, and returned to her work. "Help you with something?" she asked without looking up. "Just curious how it's going," the land returns. Slowly. "Bureaucracy exists for a reason, and undoing 6 years of fraud takes time." She made a notation in a ledger. "But we're making progress. Already returned 18 properties to their rightful owners, and we've got another 32 pending review. And the people who can't come back? Who died or moved too far away? We track down their heirs. If there are no heirs, the land goes into a trust managed by the territory until someone with legitimate claims steps forward." She finally looked at him fully. "You're Calder, the one who helped Elena Vargas." "I am." "You look better than I expected, considering what I heard about your condition 2 weeks ago." "I'm resilient." "Apparently." She closed the ledger. "Elena stopped by yesterday, said you were thinking about staying on at her ranch. Word traveled fast in small towns." "Thinking about it." "You should. Woman needs help, and you've already proven you're willing to bleed for what matters." The clerk's expression softened slightly. "This territory needs more people like you, people who stand up when it's dangerous instead of just when it's convenient." Rhett didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and left. But her words stayed with him as he walked back through town toward the room he was still renting while he finished recovering. People who stand up when it's dangerous. That was what Miguel had done. What Elena had done. What Silas had chosen to do when he could have just walked away. Maybe it was time for Rhett to stop thinking of himself as just a man good with a gun and start thinking about what else he might be capable of. The decision crystallized 3 days later when Rhett rode out to the Vargas ranch for the first time since everything had started. Elena had invited him to see the repairs, and Silas had offered to drive the wagon since Rhett still couldn't sit a horse comfortably for long periods. The ranch was about an hour northwest of town, nestled in a valley with good water and better grazing land. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and windows that let in morning light. Several outbuildings, barn, stable, bunkhouse, showed signs of both age and recent repair work. Elena met them at the porch, wiping her hands on a rag. She'd been working. That much was clear from the dirt on her clothes and the satisfied exhaustion in her face. "Welcome," she said. "It's not much, but it's home." Rhett climbed down from the wagon, took in the property with an eye for detail. Good bones, solid construction, the kind of place that could thrive with proper care and attention. "It's more than enough." They walked the property together, Elena pointing out what needed fixing, what had already been repaired, her plans for expansion once the legal situation fully settled. Silas had rejoined the work crew that was rebuilding the barn's northern wall, fitting into the rhythm of labor like he'd been born to it. "This is what Miguel dreamed about," Elena said as they stood looking out over the valley. "A place where families could build something lasting, where the land belonged to people who worked it, not men who bought and sold it like poker chips. He'd be proud of what you've done. We've done." She glanced at him. "All of us. This didn't happen because I was stubborn. It happened because people chose to help when helping was dangerous." Rhett thought about that. About the chain of choices that had led to this moment. Miguel documenting Hale's crimes, Elena refusing to quit, Silas choosing redemption, the people of Harrisville finally finding their courage. One person could stand up, but it took a community to make that stand mean something permanent. "I'll stay," he said quietly, "if the offer's still open." Elena's face lit up, genuine pleasure mixing with relief. "It is. Room in the bunkhouse, fair wages, and work enough for 3 people, let alone 1. Think you can handle it? Only one way to find out." That night, sitting around a fire with Elena and Silas and the work crew that was helping rebuild, Rhett felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Belonging. Not perfect, not permanent, but real enough to matter. The conversation flowed easily. Stories about the day's work, plans for tomorrow, small jokes that spoke to the kind of camaraderie that developed between people working toward a shared goal. Rhett mostly listened, content to be part of something without needing to lead it or fight for it. At some point, Elena ended up sitting beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You did good," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "So did you." "We did good," she corrected. "Together." They sat like that until the fire burned down to coals and the stars came out in force, each point of light a reminder that the universe was vast and indifferent, but that the small corner they'd carved out mattered anyway. The months that followed weren't easy, but they were honest. Rhett learned the rhythms of ranch work, mending fences, tending livestock, fixing the 100 small things that broke on a property this size. His body healed slowly, the wound becoming first a scar, then just another mark among many that told the story of a life lived hard. Hale's trial came and went. The verdict was never in doubt. Too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many crimes to ignore or explain away. The judge sentenced him to hang, and a month later the sentence was carried out in the territorial capital with all the ceremony the law required. Elena didn't attend. Said she'd already spent enough of her life focused on Hale, and watching him die wouldn't bring Miguel back or heal the damage that had been done. Rhett understood. Some endings didn't need witnessing to be real. Coleman got 10 years for corruption and accessory to murder. Several of Hale's men faced various charges, their fates depending on how deeply they'd been involved and how willing they were to cooperate with prosecutors. The land kept being returned. Families kept coming back. The territory appointed a new land agent for the region, a woman named Morrison, who had a reputation for being aggressively honest and completely unbribable. Under her watch, the transfers continued, each one correcting an old wrong. It wasn't perfect. Some people never came back. Some damage couldn't be undone. Some scars remained no matter how much time passed. But it was better. And better, Rhett was learning, was enough to build a life on. He and Elena developed an easy friendship that sometimes hinted at more but never quite crossed that line. She was healing in her own time, learning to carry Miguel's memory without being crushed by it. Rhett was content to be patient, to be present, to let whatever would develop naturally. Silas stayed on too, becoming something between a ranch hand and a grandfather figure to the whole operation. He taught the younger workers tricks he'd learned over decades, told stories that were probably only half true, and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. "You know what the difference is?" he said to Rhett one evening as they worked on repairing the bunkhouse roof. "Between hunting people and building things?" "What?" "Hunting ends. Someone gets caught or killed, and then you start over with a new target. It's all endings with nothing in between." Silas hammered in a nail with practiced efficiency. Building continues, you fix a roof and it keeps the rain out for years. You mend a fence and it holds cattle safe. The work you do today matters tomorrow and next week and next year. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself. Maybe I am. Spent 23 years doing work that mattered for about 5 minutes. Feels strange doing work that might matter for decades. Silas looked out over the valley, the setting sun painting everything gold and orange. But it's a good kind of strange. Rhett understood. He had spent most of his life being useful in moments of crisis, valuable when violence was needed but adrift in the spaces between. Learning to be useful in quieter ways, to matter without fighting, was a different kind of challenge. But it was one worth meeting. 6 months after Hale's arrest, Elena threw a party to celebrate the ranch's full recovery and to thank everyone who'd helped make it possible. Half the territory showed up, families who'd gotten their land back, workers who'd helped rebuild, townspeople who'd finally found their courage that night in the church. Rhett watched from the porch as people laughed and ate and danced to music provided by a fiddler who'd lost his farm to Hale 3 years earlier and just gotten it back. There was joy here, genuine and hard-earned, the kind that only came after surviving something that tried to break you. "You look thoughtful," Elena said, joining him with 2 glasses of something that was probably whiskey. "Just thinking about how strange life is. 6 months ago, I was bleeding out in a canyon. Now I'm watching people celebrate because we didn't give up. Funny how things work out." She handed him one of the glasses, raised her own. "To stubborn people who don't know when to quit." "To stubborn people," Rhett agreed, and they drank. They stood there for a while watching the party, comfortable in the silence between them. Eventually, Elena spoke again, her voice quieter. "I've been thinking about Miguel lately. Not the way I used to. Not with grief so sharp it cuts. More like remembering an old friend. Missing him, but grateful for the time we had." "That's good. That's healing." "It is." She looked at Rhett. "And I've been thinking about what comes next, not just for the ranch, but for me. Who I want to be now that the fighting's done." "Any conclusions?" "Some. I know I want to keep this place running, keep Miguel's dream alive. I know I want to help other families rebuild, use what I learned fighting Hale to help others fight their own battles. She paused. And I know I want you here, not just as a ranch hand, but as whatever we're becoming. Rhett's heart kicked up a notch. Elena, I'm not ready for everything, she said quickly, not ready to call it love or make promises about forever, but I'm ready to stop pretending what's between us is just gratitude or friendship. What is it then? I don't know yet. Something new. Something I didn't plan for but don't want to lose. She met his eyes. Is that enough? Can you live with not knowing exactly what this is? Rhett thought about all the certainties in his life that had led to nothing good, about how the best thing he'd ever done was making a choice without knowing how it would end. Yeah, he said. I can live with that. Elena smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking over the valley. Then she kissed him, brief and soft and full of possibility. When she pulled back, Rhett could see tears in her eyes, but they were the good kind. Thank you, she said, for everything, for staying, for being patient, for being you. Same to you. They returned to the party, and Rhett found himself pulled into the celebration, dancing badly, eating too much, listening to stories, and telling a few of his own. At some point, Silas cornered him with another glass of whiskey and a knowing look. Saw that, the old man said. Saw what? You and Elena, whatever that was. That was none of your business. Everything's my business. I'm old. I've earned the right to be nosy. Silas grinned. But I'm happy for you, both of you. You deserve something good after all the bad. We'll see if it lasts. It will if you work at it. Nothing good comes easy, but that doesn't mean it's not worth the effort. The party continued into the night, becoming the kind of celebration that people would talk about for years. The night the territory started healing. The night families came together to mark survival and new beginnings. The night that proved Hale hadn't won, that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. Rhett stayed until the fire burned down and the last guest departed, helping clean up alongside Elena and Silas and a few others who were too happy or too drunk to leave. When everything was finally put away and the ranch was quiet again, he stood on the porch one more time, looking out at land that was starting to feel like home. You coming to bed? Elena called from inside. Or you planning to stare at the valley all night? Coming, Rhett called back, but he took one more moment, breathing in the night air, feeling the ache in his ribs that would probably never fully go away, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Miguel had asked Elena to fight. Elena had asked Rhett to help. Silas had chosen redemption over money. The people of Harrisville had found their courage. And together, they'd proven that one person standing up could start something that changed everything. The world was still hard. Justice was still difficult. Evil men would still try to take what wasn't theirs. But now Rhett knew, really knew, bone deep, that fighting back mattered, that standing up was worth it even when the odds were terrible and the cost was high, because better was possible, and better was enough. He turned from the valley and walked inside, toward warmth and light, and the people who'd become something like family. The door closed behind him with a soft click, shutting out the past and opening toward whatever future they'd build together. It wouldn't be perfect. Nothing ever was. But it would be theirs, hard-earned, honestly won, built on the foundation of people who refused to accept that wrong had to triumph. And that was worth more than any bounty, any fortune, any stolen empire built on blood and lies. In the end, Rhett Calder had learned what Miguel Vargas had known all along, that the land was worth fighting for, not because of what it could give you, but because of what fighting for it made you become. Someone who stood up when it mattered. Someone who didn't quit when quitting was easier. Someone who helped others find their courage by first finding their own. And in a world that often felt designed to grind decent people down, that was the most valuable thing a person could be. The light from the windows spilled out into the darkness, warm and welcoming, marking the ranch as a place where broken people could heal and broken systems could be challenged, and broken promises could finally be kept. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the night. Another answered. Then another. The wild things continuing their conversations, indifferent to human drama, reminding anyone who listened that the world was bigger than any individual story. But that didn't make individual stories meaningless. Sometimes one story, told honestly and lived courageously, was exactly what the world needed to start changing. And this story of a woman who wouldn't quit and the people who helped her win would echo through the territory for generations. A reminder that justice was possible, that fighting back mattered, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they found the courage to stand together. The night settled over the Vargas Ranch, peaceful and complete. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to build something lasting. But tonight, for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, everyone under that roof could sleep without fear. And that was victory enough.